Game begin.
Hello, I am back with my original co-host, Washed King, Michael J. Flores. Mike, welcome back to Spy Colony. We missed you for a week.
I'm really touched that you would give me the distinction of king, especially washed king, which puts me in the category of LeBron James.
LeBron is evidently unwashed.
Yeah,
he
but
is still dirty.
No, he is.
He's still nasty.
He's like, I mean, if I said he was a top 5 player in the NBA at age 40, that might be an exaggeration. Emphasis on might. He's certainly a top 15 player.
It would be debatable.
But I think he might be top 5.
You are more so a washed king than, like, LeBron James is the king. You're a washed king.
I don't know. I mean,
you got third place in the smallest Lobstercon of all time. So,
well, I would just like to point out, I don't know how many people like go too deep in the Facebook group and like just see like our responses to each other. And so I posted this replenish deck, which is not exactly a copy and paste of Mengu's deck. I have 3 Hydroblasts in my sideboard where he has, I believe, 3 blue elemental blasts. The Hydroblasts were just closer at hand when I was making deck picks. Aaron Dix is like, you love abeyance, you invented abeyance, how do you not have abeyance? You have to have mana leaks, and he's really kind of implying that I should have copy and pasted Rich Shea's deck, which is I think I'm going to do next. Like, I don't think people get, I just like making deck picks, and like now I just have been posting deck picks on my Instagram. It's not a huge following, but it's been growing steadily, and I'm almost out of decks to take deck picks of. I am now reduced to just like stealing things that SWB says to me and posting those as like, wow, that was really smart. Like,
highly motivated by deck picks and try to change up my deck each meetup just so I can have a new deck pick each time.
Oh, I'm just going to make the deck that you won that meetup with and take a deck pick of it just probably in its entirety. Then I'm going to take what are the Naya's lands called? Rith's Grove. I'm going to remove Rith's Grove, replace it with Treva's Ruins, and you don't have any red cards, right? Your red cards are on the sideboard.
His red kings are on the sideboard.
All on the sideboard.
Yeah, and I'll just add like a null and Hydroblast and pretend it's a different deck. That's
just put meddling mages in the sideboard. It'd be very good, I think.
Oh wow, look at that! Another deck pick will be available because I'm going to be. There's just not enough decks in premodern. I'm going to run out of deck picks.
The decks are looking pretty good. Your playset orientation is doing excellent. There are not any glare issues. I don't love the sideboard orientation, but we'll chalk it up to artistic choice. They're performing well in the square format. You threw a standard deck pick in here, which I don't know. I think that's...
Andy Levine asked me to borrow a standard deck for one of his friends. We met at the Legacy last night, and it just was convenient for me to take the deck pick and throw it in there. And it got, like, nobody liked it. Like, I think I've cultivated a very insular audience.
In any case...
nobody liked it.
We also have on the line, unwashed king, Mr. Steven with PH, Wyatt Danger Bush, SWB.
What's up?
Winner of every meetup except for one.
I went 4-0 in the meetup that...
Listen, you went 4-0 in the smallest meetups of all time. SWB has gone 5 for 6, 6 for 7, 5 for 6.
5 for 6.
Just in the last 3 months, just 5 of 6.
5
Been
of
on
6.
A bit of a heater.
Unreal.
I lost one match to Dave Kaplan.
Yeah. And then
I lost the one that I went 4-0. I lost to Dave Kaplan at my house, and then later that day we recorded the worst episode of Spy Colony ever.
Oh, yeah.
In any case...
Yes, and then I avenged that loss in a subsequent meetup against Dave.
What did you use to beat Dave? What deck? Elves?
Elves. One of the joke Elves decks, if you will. No survival. This was the one with Force Mage. This was base. Yeah.
There's a standard RCQ 6 minutes from SWB's house, like triangulated in between my house and SWB's house, the day of the Manhattan meetup. And I'm like, oh man, do I have a better shot at the standard RCQ Will Lanny make fun of me for playing standard?
Yes.
I mean, I only really just like to play pre-modern. What am I doing? But this is like, I mean, I don't know, man. Is it giving up to play in the standard RCQ instead of a pre-modern meetup that night?
It is giving up on trying to defeat Steven.
Well, I mean, what if Steven plays in the... It's 6 minutes from his house.
Danger is not playing...
From where he's sitting right now,
Are you?
It is 6
Are you
minutes
considering this?
on foot.
I've given no thought to standard.
Well,
Yeah,
tell
thank
what,
you very much.
SWB, I have a standard deck built. I just posted it on my Instagram. Why don't I walk to your house, which is only a few minutes from my house, and hand it to you, and you can...
I don't want to learn new cards.
Yeah, nobody wants that.
Oh my god! Speaking of learning new cards, I was over SWB's house testing Legacy. I lost with every deck they gave me. Like, I don't think I won any games. I was very bad at Legacy.
There's a lot of new cards you must learn in Legacy, right? Because like all the stuff that was never in Modern, and it's all these nonsense cards that are balanced in a 4-player game with however much life.
They were never developed. None of these cards is ever developed. Are you kidding? They've never been developed. Not a one of them. Well, I mean, the Modern Horizons ones were developed. The ones that are anything from Modern Horizons or standard sets were like, oh, I wonder how many arms Dr. Octopus should have.
Yeah,
Like,
it dawned on me the other day that I'm only playing Legacy still just because I've been playing for so long and I'm kind of have a lot of sunk cost. But if I were to approach the format today and someone were to say, hey, would you like to play this format with all these multiplayer cards in a 2-player format, I probably would just say no.
Yeah.
you were watching The Hobbit Part 3 last night. I went to the Legacy tournament, which costs $20 to play, and they were packed. It's crazy.
Inflation, man.
Well, no,
There's a tariff.
$20 to play Legacy on a Friday night, packed, and there was a standard tournament going on at the same time. So they're doing great. So I played in it, borrowed a deck from Andy Levine. Speaking of not playing well, speaking of not knowing new cards, Andy watches my second round match, and I'm like, oh, I think I should have done this different. He looks at me, he's like, you should have done a lot of things different for 2 games.
He's like,
I'm like, maybe I shouldn't play this.
he just like
deck.
pulls out a notebook and he's like, all right, it's
He's just like,
turn 0.
he's like, you know, he couldn't win, right? Why did you try to win? And
starting with the mulligans.
Yeah, you can always count on Andy for the hard truth about your games.
The thing that's amazing to me is how does he know how these Legacy decks interact, right? Like, I've been watching Legacy videos to catch up for the Trios tournament. I don't know any of these things. I just know, like, Boston Roll doesn't like a card. Like, one of my opponents played this card. Boston Roll complains every single time that card gets played. I can't believe they printed this card. He played 2 against me in one game, and I lost that game. So I could understand it. But the more important thing is we tested pre-modern after the Legacy tournament. I was so excited to bring the Pitless Rack deck, Stupor, Cabal Therapy, Tempting Worm, and I brought decks. I brought the red deck. I'm like, oh, I can't wait to play Pitless Rack against red. I gave Andy red. My God, is Pitless Rack unplayable. Andy played 4 games from red side, won all 4, including a game that I played 2 Tempting Worms. I'm like, I don't know, is this player error? We switched. I played red. I went 3-1. Andy won a second turn Tempting Worm game where he knew that the coast was clear off of duress. And he lost the other 3. And I'm like, wait a minute. 2 things. 1, maybe Tempting Worm Stupor isn't the best deck. And then we played other matchups that also didn't win. And B, maybe red's not dead. Like, I lost a game that I played 2 Tempting Worms in one game. And he's just
what
like,
a roller coaster. Red's not dead?
He just like, I'm like, I stupor him when he has 2 cards in. He's just like, Incinerate, Fire Blast. I like look at the board and there's like a Barbarian Ring and a Grim Lavamancer. And I'm like, oh man, I hope he doesn't know how to do this in the correct order. He didn't do it in the corrected order. He thought about it, did not do it in the correct order, and still roasted me.
I mean, I think what we could be seeing potentially, and I have a hard time saying this because I'm not a huge believer in this, but the equities for specific decks might be running closer together. So
that would be so good.
So
it would be so good if it's not only 12-12. Like Dr. Surf and Surf himself says. He says it's closer than you're saying.
I think that the comment that David made with regards to there are other decks with similar win rates to Mono Blue Stifle Knot, I think that is intriguing. It is intriguing to me that a deck like Terrageddon could possibly have a strong win rate over a large sample size. We're talking 60% over just over 600 matches. That's excellent. It's a pretty healthy amount of data, and I would not assume that there are. I would not assume that only Tarragon sickos have played all 600 of those matches. Same goes for Replenish, and again, Duress Crew data comprises Magic Online data, which has a lot of players that are price insensitive, so they can play decks regardless of how much they cost. And then Mono Blue Dreadnought with a 550 match sample size, also 60%. I don't expect there to be a pilot population difference. However, I've played all three of these decks, and Dreadnought is the best one.
All right,
like, I don't know how to explain that to somebody who listens to this podcast and thinks that there is another rational way to do this besides have you seen these decks in action? Dreadnought is the broken one.
I know the answer to this. I actually know the answer. So you make fun of me because I used to make decks, right? So I used to make a lot of decks.
Allegedly, I've never actually seen it happen. I've only heard the stories.
By my peers, I was named one of the top 10 deck designers of all time. So I used to make a lot of decks, and a lot of my decks were like Rube Goldberg machines, right? Like, you had to do a lot of things. You had to A+B. I had a lot of situations where I was doing things like, I don't know, Gifts Ungivening to set up Life from the Loam loops, and you'd win, but you'd have to teach someone how to play the decks. Usually they weren't very intuitive. One day after a Nationals, Paul Cheon had made top 8 of a Nationals with a Fairies deck after Ancestral Vision had rotated in Standard. So his way to draw cards with Shadow Mage Infiltrator was kind of really novel in a Fairies deck. And so I played his deck on Magic Online for a few days after US Nationals. And the conclusion I came to was my win rate was the same. My average win rate was the same as when I was playing Michael J decks, but my God, was it easy. Right? Like, I would just steamroll all these MFers, and it was so easy. Like, wow, Bitter Blossom? This is what it feels like when it's on my side of the table? It's like when I'm playing Michael J decks, I'm just like chewing my nails to make sure that they don't figure out my mouse trap, or they stumble on mana or whatever. But my win rate was the same. I think that's what you're saying in a different.
I mean, I can't. I'm not good at constructing a picture of what 60% looks like in one hand and 60% looks in the other. And I actually will, like, the easiest thing to say is like, oh, a bunch of fish play Dreadnought and they're losing, where Dreadnought senseis would not lose.
Oh, that's what I think.
Well, that may so as time progresses, that may become less and less true. So the Dress Crew event just happened. And amongst the participants were, none other than Brian Selden himself, playing a sort of tweaked version of the tideless Dr. Surf deck called Hootenanny Blue, which I had him on the podcast, but didn't ask him why he called it that. So it'll remain a mystery. And, he finished a lowly 15th place.
Which is terrible for him.
It's terrible. It's really bad. It's 14 places below expectation.
In the state of Massachusetts? I mean, it's not like he had to travel very far.
He played 3 Brain Freeze, 3 Dominant Date. So one of the things that happened was everybody expected that Massachusetts would once again be just a complete blue heavy meta, and the opposite happens. Goblins takes it down over the green red Oath. The next blue deck in the top 8 is Survival Opposition in 3rd place, playing such blue cards as Tradewind Rider, Opposition, End of List, Mystic Snake, one of
Hydroblast in the sideboard.
Yeah,
this is a deck that has consistently performed at the volleyball 1Ks. Every volleyball 1K
in the hands of none other than Greg Fenton, one of the legendary Northeast area collectors, vintage players that Mike Harris had gotten into pre-modern. Then we have Tarragon and Goblins once again, full English breakfast. a deck built around a card that has UU1 in its mana cost, and once again contains such blue cards as 3 Intuition, Palancron, Psychotog, 1 Chill in the sideboard, 1 Hydroblast, end of list. The only blue deck, the only real blue deck in this top 8 is Psychotog, piloted by Ken Takahama, with none other than John Finkel himself, Shadow Mage Infiltrator, as the important card draw engine now that Ancestral Visions is not legal in the pre-modern format. Everybody thought that would be Blue Bloodbath. This tournament might be the first leading indicator that things have finally come around. There are enough Pyroblasts and sideboards. There are enough Hidden Gibbons getting unhidden, and it is indeed possible to prevent Brian Selden from winning a large tournament in the state of Massachusetts.
Oath Ponza in second place.
Yeah. So
Yes.
So Steven, what's your take? You play every deck. You play Elves. You play Terrageddon. You played Terrageddon Parfait variant, pioneered by Riche. You played Dreadnought itself. You're just kind of playing whatever deck. What you know?
I do play a lot of decks, and of the 6 meetups, the one where I played Shrimp was definitely the easiest. I just want to echo that sentiment that that was a 100% game win rate night that nothing ever felt close. Whereas like winning a meetup with the Terrageddon Parfait required a whole lot more game actions.
Really? You annihilated me, and I went.
Our match was short, yeah.
I went 6-0 in games that were not against you. So like
Those were the shortest
2-0'd
games.
all the other opponents, but I'm like, I
Whoa.
sit down against SWB, and I'm like, and he mulligans the first turn Exalted Angel, and he knows from testing I can't beat any Exalted Angel, even if it was on say the second turn.
Yeah.
Right. Like,
Nope.
the third turn, I still couldn't beat it.
Maybe there's some world with Tangle Wire gets you out of that, but it's tough.
He tricked me. He tricked me into taking the Wastelands out of my deck, and I had 2 snow-covered forests, which were the Wasteland proxies, and I could have disrupted him, but he tricked me.
And this you could read all about in the newest meetup report on spikecolony.com.
Can you make it not so ugly? It says like meetup report by Michael J by Lanny, and then it has no pictures, and you're just like, and you like put a note like, oh, Mike like embedded like a deck pick here, but I'm too lazy to put it in.
I
Like,
wasn't too lazy to put it in.
It literally says that. In
I
the
can't
report.
I can't figure out how to do it because the way it's supposed to work is that if I paste the link into the thing, the embed shows up. But when I paste the link into the thing just says can't find embed. So I don't know. Is your Instagram on private or something? Like I don't
No.
know.
I'm trying to acquire Instagram followers. I have 14,000 Twitter followers who don't use Twitter anymore.
Yeah. Well, whose fault
I
is
did not
that?
know that we had meetup
Elon?
reports. That's fun.
Elon Musk.
You are welcome to write and contribute meetup reports to spikecolony.com.
Sure.
I
I
was
can help
gonna
you with
write
this
it-
embed issue too.
Yeah.
I was going to write it in
Yeah, thank you.
And
Steven's
Lanny's like,
by the way, I am also qualified.
I can
I
do
mean,
websites.
it's WordPress, right? How hard can it be?
That's the thing, is that the WordPress makes it very easy, but then if it doesn't work, it's not easy to like get under the hood and fix it.
God, Lanny, this is not difficult.
Okay,
So I think
you
we're
are
talking about what
welcome
do we
to
think of the-
maintain. You are welcome to maintain.
I was going to
Spike
put it
Colony.
in non-idiots. You said just put it on SpikeColony.
No, because SpikeColony.com
by
should-
Michael J. by Lanny.
Okay. I will take care of this in due time. I was on my way out the door, and I promised you that I would publish it that night, and so I published it that night, but then I had to go, and then I couldn't work on the website for like the next 5 days because I was working. So
Wait, are we in agreement that on the 18th of March, neither I nor Stephen Bush are going to play in the Brooklyn Strategist RCQ? Even though it's like very close to our house.
yeah, you guys are playing
I'm
pre-modern.
definitely not playing in a standard RCQ.
What if I gave you a deck? Would you play in the standard RCQ? And then I would just go take the Manhattan meetup. You don't worry about that one. Let's hand you a deck.
Okay. I see now. I see this is
What do you see?
This was okay.
Oh,
okay.
no.
Okay. my bad.
I love contemporary Magic the Gathering. I love especially when I win the roll.
Oh, man.
That's awesome when I win the roll. But Steven, it's great. And it's 6
I dabbled in
per house.
standard a little bit last year on like Arena
Yeah.
on my iPad, but this year I have sworn off digital Magic, so I'm totally out of touch with standard and have no.
Don't worry, I will
plans to
hand you a deck.
participate.
It's 75 is put together. I'll put it in suites. It's very
All right.
powerful. You cast cards and they disrupt your opponent's ability to play Magic the Gathering.
That is my favorite thing to do.
All right, so we were talking about Steven's meetup wins with various decks. Dreadnought felt like the most powerful, but the real question is, where is this coming from? What is happening? Why are you so
better
good?
than the rest of us? That's what's
Oh,
happening.
well, I do love meetups. I love the format of meetups. I love that we just play until one person is undefeated. I think this came up in a Discord discussion recently. I like the short format of meetups. And I also think that meetups, unlike some larger events, are pretty good opportunities to play worse decks and do well. Like, you can play wackier decks at meetups and still do well, I think, compared to real events.
Meetups have a little bit of a mini metagame where it is like first 2 rounds wacky decks, but then you're 2-0. So then you have to play against Mike, and he's playing a deck he copied from somebody else. So you have to like fight really hard a little bit, but sometimes. But he never mulligans. So like if you just like you just like sit there, you draw your opening 7, you look at Mike, he's got this. He actually just tells you, he's like, I should probably mulligan this, and you're like, okay, I got this. And then in the finals, you might play against SWB, you might be SWB, and you might play a real tough matchup against a real tough deck. So it is just like a small microcosm of like a 9-rounder, which like everything would just be stretched out.
What if you were walking by a match and you saw like, I don't know, a thieving magpie in play, and you're just like, oh,
can't wait to play against that.
I love the meetup metagame. So you look at your opening hand and you have a lightning bolt and an incinerate. You're like, I can take out a thieving magpie. This is going to be great.
And then you get hit by a turn 1 Gerard's Verdict.
And then another Gerard's Verdict, and then a Terrabor. Yeah. And then you're like, oh, wow, that Terrabor is too big to kill, even if I hadn't discarded the 2-3 damage spells that I have.
I cannot believe that I'm on this side of the argument after going out and like talking about how Mox Diamond is a playable card for the first 2 years of my pre-modern experience. Putting yourself at 3 cards in hand on turn 1 to put your opponent at roughly the same amount also on turn 1 does not sound like exciting match to me. Well, you're telling me that I'm spending the first 4 cards in my hand to Gerard's Verdict, where you're like forcing them to London mulligan.
It's particularly powerful against Burn, right? If discarding 2 cards for 1, it gets you even, but if they have to discard a land, that's like you just bought a lightning bolt at the same time. It's really quite, and he knows I'm playing Burn, right? I thought he was playing Thieving Magpie deck. So
I just want to zoom out
anyway.
I just want to zoom out for a second and just be like, turn 1 Gerard's Verdict, not a particularly powerful thing to do. Turn 1 Mox Fetch Land, Weathered Wayfarer is the same thing as turn 1 Gerard's Verdict, except for it's 2 turns slower to get the 2 cards. Like, all of these Mox hands that are happening to people, the only one that comes even close to compelling is turn 1 Sylvan Library. And then the rest, or Danny, Sphere of Resistance. The rest are just like complete garbage.
I'm not sure what lens you're looking at pre-modern through right this second. I'm not sure what it is. But I will just have 1.5 anecdotes about recent metagame stuff that will maybe people can determine this. So I was talking to my very good friend Brian David Marshall, and I showed him Sam's deck. I don't know if I've ever told the story in the podcast or ever told the story to you. BDM made a deck called How to Keep an Idiot Busy in like 1996. The first time I ever laid eyes on Zvi Moshowitz, I was at Pro Tour Dallas, and he was playing How to Keep an Idiot Busy like on Sunday at like a fun table or whatever. I believe he'd played it on the Pro Tour. The deck was all cantrips, including Barbed Sextant and Flare. You could like flare a Pump Knight. That was like pretty cool. And it killed with Deadly Insect that could pretty much only cast with the green mana from a Barbed Sextant. But like, yeah, look, Steven's like excited by this, right? Like every single card is just like, it's just like doing something a little bit, right? Like, oh, I made a mana, or oh, I did 1 damage, but it's just deck touching, right? And he did this in 1996, which is well before a lot of our favorite deck touching cards have been printed. So I'm like, oh, Sam's deck is really like I would say postmodern, but really like pre-modern, postmodern, How to Keep an Idiot Busy. And don't mistake this for an Enchantress deck. It just has Enchantresses because that's how you get the most deck touching, right? Like, this isn't an Enchantress deck in quotes with capital E. This is a deck touching deck. This is the cheapest, most compact way to touch your deck. What you really do is just run people out of cards with Gaia's Blessings. He's like, wow, this is my favorite thing. And he started saying stuff like, can we get an abundance in there? And I was just like, an abundance? That costs 4 mana. And I'm thinking about this from the perspective of Sam on the podcast, when he's just like, I just want to do the most small casting cost thing. So I'm like, we don't do that. He's just like, I hate your format. He literally says to me, I hate your format. You can't do 4 mana things. I'm like, well, the second best deck is Replenish, and it's only 4 mana things. And he's just like, I love your format again. Then the meetup happens in Brooklyn, where I went 6-0 in non-SWB games and 0-2 in SWB games.
With 4 drops.
And I showed him SWB's deck, which has 4 Sylvan Library and an abundance. Moxes.
4 mana abundance.
And he has
4 Armageddons.
His creatures are just deck touching creatures, if you think about it, right? Like
Wayfarer,
Weather Wayfarer
yeah.
is just like tap, touch your deck. That's what the
Weather Wayfarer is an enchantment, yeah.
Okay.
I think of that deck as Deck Toucher's Delight.
Yeah. BDM looks at this deck and he says, this is everything I've ever wanted to do in Magic. And I thought about this for a second and I'm like, what if you never Armageddon Terrorboard? What if you never screwed Mike's Knight up by playing a first turn Exalted Angel? What if all you did was go Sylvan Library Abundance, Gaia's Blessing, Swords to Plowshares, and that's what you did for 50 turns?
It is set up for that, right? So that deck is based on a Rich Shea's Aggro Parfait deck, and I just made a few tweaks based on what I expected to see locally and a little bit to fit my playstyle a little better, like putting an Exalted Angel main and an Exalted Angel on the board, and then cramming 4 Hidden Gibbons in the board.
You slid a couple Aura of Silence into the sideboard as well.
I did put 2 Aura of Silence because another thing I enjoy about local meetups is metagaming for the local meetups, and there's usually like 2 or 3 Enchantress players locally.
There were 3 Enchantress players in Brooklyn.
Yeah, so that's what I was expecting. I knew there'd be probably 2, maybe 3. So I packed extra Aura of Silence.
But you don't have to do any of the proactive Terravore stuff. You could just be like some sort of weird Sam Black, where you're just like, Sylvan Library Abundance, Gaia's Blessing, Swords to Plowshares for 50 turns.
And I want to say that later in that weekend, I was kind of reporting back on how the deck did and mentioned to Rich Shea, and we were talking about, I wonder how this does against Dreadnought. So we just fired up and played. Lanny watched some of that.
You didn't play digitally. You played camera with each other?
Yeah, they played
webcam,
webcam. So three games
And so
pre-board, 3 games post-board. It lasted about 17 hours. The end result...
and the last game post-board, I kind of did what you're saying. It was more the parfait plan. Like, I did not try to Armageddon or Terravore because all 8 of those cards were out of the deck. And I just had lots of answers. And at some point I realized that the worst thing I could do is play a win condition because it would get dominated. All I needed to do was just sit back.
You just do nothing.
Just do nothing and win.
He can't do the Mission Charm plan against you, right? Because you've Gaia's Blessing.
I mean, he can counter 2 Gaia's Blessings.
Or
He had 3 dominates, I had learned, and I gathered by that point he had no powder kegs.
Yeah.
All right, so what happened? What was the result?
2-1-2-1. 2-1 pre-board for Rich, 2-1 post-board for SWB.
I mean, what else could you want? We're talking about the Doctor here, right? This isn't like Pitiless Rack, right? If I went 2-1-2-1 against Pitiless Rack, I might
the Gibbons felt good, but you must pair the Gibbons with some form of pressure, otherwise he can just sit back until he can dominate it and wreck me.
Yep.
So there must be some kind of clock. So taking out all the Terravores, it felt like maybe I'm not supposed to take out all of them. It also felt like maybe I want to leave in a Miser's Armageddon.
I think it's good to have... You had Call the Herd in your deck, right?
There were 2 copies of Call the Herd, and those stayed in. I did go down on Mox Diamonds, fearing powder keg blowouts.
Yeah, that's kind of a tricky...
in there.
Yeah, that's a tricky one. I mean, I would have powder keg. I think powder keg is in every Dreadnought deck now. Like, I think that whatever Rich is doing is fine. It's probably different. Maybe he has brain freeze. Maybe he has some other stuff going on. But I think like 2 copies of powder keg in the 75 is like very good. I think 4 is like, I don't know. And then I think like 1 or 0, like 1 is like what the Lobstercon list was. But right now on the Dreadnought deck, my sort of belief is that the magic number is just 2. And I think you should play 2 Dominates. I think you should play 2 Powder Kegs. I think you should play 2 Parallax Tide, 2 Chain of Vapor. And
I was going to ask you about the Tide aspect, Lanny. I posted Hootenanny Blue on my Instagram, and Mash Legs, famous Goblins master, Western Wisconsin Friday night streamer Misty Champion Mashleg said he thought it was foolish to not have the Tide combo anymore on the sideboard. And he likened it to the deck that made Jerry Thompson the best deck designer in the world around 2011.
Yeah, so my opinion is that 2 is the magic number. And that you don't have to play 3 because 3 is a lot. You might draw 2. Like, my favorite thing about 2 is that you'll draw 1. But you won't draw 2. And it's like really, really excellent to draw 1 Parallax Tide, and you really don't have to do it.
So everything's
like,
2 in your sideboard, two AKs?
I play 4 AKs main deck now.
Two AKs, okay.
Yeah. But if I were to play 2 card advantage spells in my sideboard, you know that I would be playing either 2 Deep Analysis or 2 Factor Fiction, depending on my mood. But the other thing is that I think that Misdirection is a potential cut. It's kind of like a cute card, but it actually doesn't do something which I like, which is like let you do things.
You're just mad that you got annulled.
Yeah. As someone who gets blown out by Misdirection, I fully support you removing that card.
As someone who knows you got blown out by a null, I feel like this is like sour grapes.
No,
no, those grapes are sour.
Misdirection. It's real. Misdirection's a card that's waiting for a target, and I actually don't think that that's like particularly good in the way that you're constructing Dreadnought these days, which is like jamming all these AKs in. It's like the more you draw cards, the more proactive you have to be. Because if you're just holding cards waiting for a target, then you're not doing anything, and then all of a sudden your opponent can pull back in.
Well, I mean, that's a heavily loaded set of sentences, some of which are true, some of which are not useful. But you said something really, really interesting that I thought about a lot. Like, I think the last time I casted with you, which was, I think, 2 weeks ago now, you're just like, this sideboard allows you to transform, which is the most important thing, was the thing that you said.
Yeah, and I stole that from Lan. That's not a Lanny. That's a Lan.
Yeah, so I'm like, oh wow, is that the most important thing? Is that some sideboards are tweak sideboards. Look at Steven's sideboard from the aggro parfait. It doesn't really transform. It just has a lot of cards that are really good that let you tweak your deck, and they're excellent sideboards that do all different things. But so I wasn't sure, but it was something I thought interesting to think about.
It does transform against Dreadnought. Because it's called Terrageddon sometimes, right? But if you remove all the Terravores and all the Armageddons, you become this. All right. Yeah, the removal deck. It is, in that sense, it's sort of transformative.
So I wanted to prove Lanny wrong. I was trying to map out the sideboard of Pitiless Rack, where I was just like, oh, maybe Lanny makes fun of me for not making 60s anymore, but did I cease being really good at making 15s? That was the thing. And then I'm like, I'm mapping this out. Then I played the deck, and I'm like, this thing does not deserve my attention. That was like, who cares how many Funeral Charms is the right number? I can't win game 1 when I play two Tempting Worms against red.
Yeah. I mean, I think we can expand it, whereas we talked about this when we talked about second order answers or just answers in general. Like, there are sideboards which is just like, I need naturalize because my opponent's plan is to play artifacts and enchantments. And then there's some sideboards like, I am going to do something different in games 2 and 3 that I wasn't planning on doing in game 1 because everything's changed now that we're in game 2 and 3. So that is more effective if your opponent is just like, well, I am going to have your deck contains blue spells, so I'm playing Red Blast, and it's like, okay, well,
no, that's not what it is, right? In pre-modern, I think it's all about mana leverage. It's either about mana leverage or like dominating resources from sideboard standpoint, right? Like if you look at a card like Goblin Lackey, right? It's like if it's unanswered, the amount of mana leverage it generates by itself is insane, right? So the entire subgame in sideboarding is about maintaining the mana leverage that's generated by Goblin Lackey or preventing someone from getting it. That's why some decks have Hydroblast, right? That the same thing is true for Dreadnought.
Right, but that is not like a good thing. That's not a percent that like you really want to chase after because once again, if your opponent is packing 4 Goblin Lackeys, then you have to play like a lot of Blue Blast, and then your opponent has Goblin Lackey in 40% of games, and you have Blue Blast in 40% of games, which means you only have 0.4 times 0.4% of games in which they have Goblin Lackey and you Blue Blast it. Now, granted, every single time you draw Blue Blast against Goblins, it'll find a target, right? And like you might need Blue Blast, like Dreadnought needs Blue Blast because Dreadnought can't interact with objects on the battlefield very well, and the traditional tools that it uses for that, like Chain of Vapor and Powder Keg, are not effective versus goblins. But the fact that Dreadnought plays Blue Blast in the sideboard does not make the Dreadnought sideboard good. Like, it's like a thing that makes like games 2 and 3 like marginally closer together, right? But like the fact that putting Parallax Tide in the sideboard and Chain of Vapor in the main deck makes it so that you beat Stasis, you beat unprepared Enchantress players, you beat Replenish, you beat Oath Ponza. Like, that's a transformative thing. Accumulated Knowledge is... I don't know exactly where I would put that, because it is kind of a card that you can sort of just run in the main deck, because like the idea that it's like, what does it add to your deck is like, it gives you more card advantage. You know, that's kind of the same thing. It's just like, oh, I'm going to sideboard in deep analysis.
It just keeps it so that people can't grind you out, right?
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
So Dreadnought is like super powerful in terms of its mana effectiveness, right? Like it can deal 24 damage with 2 mana basically, and nobody else can do that. And then its answers are like 0 mana.
Right.
So it just by nature has, more cards as in hand is great, because half my cards say discard 3 cards,
right.
And to do so in a man effective way is great. And people like Steven are trying to stop them by generating an automatic 2-for-1 with a Pyroblast, right? Like every Pyroblast is, if you hit a Vision Charm or a Stifle, you got 2 cards with it, right? And every Aura of Silence is, it's like a kick to the shins.
Yeah.
Right? It doesn't end the game there, but man, it isn't good.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's nuance there, but I think that ultimately, when we talk about how much leverage that you're getting out of a sideboard, like the idea that your deck is going to have Blue Blast or it's going to have Naturalize is something that everybody's deck that has targets for those cards is prepared for. So, the Goblins deck doesn't fall apart just because it got its lackey Blue Blasted. Now it just means that you're actually playing a game. And so
if you compare a card like Naturalize or Disenchant to, standard equivalents or contemporary equivalents, the thing is, like, what are you naturalizing? You're naturalizing a 12/12 or a Survival of the Fittest,
or Oath of Druids,
right? Like any one of those cards, just if it's unanswered,
right? But that's my point: is that you drawing the Naturalize just means that you get a play, right? It doesn't make you good. Like, it doesn't make you good.
Like, the starting value for a Naturalize to be good is your opponent is up by 1,000, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So you're just like, oh, I made it. We're back to 0-0. Yeah, but us being back to 0 is the equivalent of me getting 9,000 points back, right? Like, so I kind of disagree with you, right? Like, now in standard, like, if I disenchant like a Fable of the Mirror Breaker or whatever, man, that sucks. I'm still going to be down at least 1 point of material, and like if the Fable token attacks me, I'm like down 4 material. Even if I'm and
you're absolutely right that premodern is more about like threats and answer, like the balance between threats and answers running closer together. But all I'm saying is that the reason Land's comment was about the burn deck, and he was saying the burn sideboard doesn't transform the burn deck, and I actually thought that was super interesting. And I'm like, okay, part of the reason why I've been tinkering with burn so much, I'm like, well, what if the burn sideboard could change what the burn game plan is about from game to game? Because like one of the big things was like, okay, well, burn what's Price of Progress? Price of Progress is just ball lightning in a different jacket.
No, it's 2 shocks for the price of 2 shocks.
Yeah. Or 2 shocks. Like, it's just the same card that you already have in your deck that's just slightly more efficient. So it doesn't change anything about what your deck is doing, and your opponent's response to it, is just like, okay, well, like maybe they don't have any response, right? Maybe people are playing a Deranged Hermit or a Hermit Druid deck. They just can't be Price of Progress. But for the most part, your opponent's response to that, is just kind of like, well, I was prepared for them to cast burn spells, right? So you're not changing anything that, like, they don't have to do anything to answer Price of Progress besides sequence their lands a little differently. But then when you like add cards like, I don't know, Wasteland or Threaten or I don't think these are like great examples of like necessarily powerful cards, but I do think that they're examples of cards that force your opponent to to like think or behave in a different way, right? So if you could transform into like, or Earthquake's like a good example, right? Because like there was just no punish for playing all your creatures
against burn,
and now there is. And so
if you
like,
look at how like when I won the volleyball 1K last year, I had a very different sideboard. You know, I still had like a curse scroll on my sideboard because that was before you had mana control in your Grotog deck. I brought it in against you in the top 4. But one of my big things was I just had like a bazillion red blasts, or I think I had like 7 red blasts in that version. And yeah, so like I was just like counter sliver against 12/12, but also it was highly functional against you, Lanny, with your, you know, Gush, Psychotog,
chill,
whatever. It was highly functional against you, and it was incredibly functional against the Survival Opposition deck I played in the finals. No card in my deck in my final match cost more than 1 mana, except for Sulfuric Vortex.
right? Well, this is a good example.
Like I annihilated.
Well, this
right?
is a good example because like the red deck doesn't have any stack interaction, and then it having
now
stack,
it does.
like yeah, it's kind of like a transformative thing, which would beg the question, just like, okay, well, what's the difference between the naturalized example? And I think that there is like a sense of like, okay, well, people are prepared to get their stuff naturalized, right? They're prepared for you to lightning bolt targeting face or targeting creature. And so things get interesting when it's like, oh, my entire game plan was to resolve Parallax Tide, and now in the sideboard I can't resolve Parallax Tide. And then it becomes interesting because if you look at burn versus Tide combo, like burn is giving Tide combo a different look by having red blasts. Tide combo's blue blasts are just to make it possible for them to play Tide combo. Like I played the burn versus Tide combo match on video, and it was just like I drew a bunch of red blasts, but they drew 6 blue blasts. But like if they don't draw 6 blue blasts, I actually like can do burn things to them.
There's another thing, which is like when I beat Andy, I think Andy beat me in game 1 at Lobstercon, and then I won game 3 on the last turn, right? Like he was going to win if I didn't win one of those games. And I just had a million, you know, red blasts. I think I drew 3 red blasts in game 3. But what it does is, like, if you're playing like Tide combo, which is 26 land, versus burn, which has like maybe 19, 20 land, baubles, etc. If you stop them from AKing or factor fictioning into card advantage, they just draw air, right? And so now if your Jackal Pup is now capable of dealing 4 damage because they drew like Island Wasteland or something, because you stop them from factor fictioning, now they have like a pivotal card that you have the red blast for. Like that is a very different kind of game than a game where like they're allowed to use Force Spike and Quicksand to keep their life total robust, cast a single factor fiction, and then you're buried, right?
Yeah, but he also brought out Tides against you. That's like a key difference, right? So like if he had Tides, then you would be like, if countering factor fiction becomes a lot scarier of a proposition, because Tide could come behind it and then be like a lot more powerful. But he boarded out his Tide, so it's like kind of different.
Yeah, I think I resolved my Lightning Bolt with a Pyroblast on the last turn, something like that.
But I wanted to bring Danger back into this.
Yeah, I've always thought about red blast and blue blast as just 1 mana interaction is great. I want as much of it as I can have. So like Mike said, having a whole deck of 1 mana spells, you can run circles around your opponent. No one wants to trade 4 mana for 1. I had 5 red blasts in the sideboard of that Terrageddon deck, but I faced 0 blue decks that night. So
yeah.
So Greg had the card Trade Wind Rider in his deck, right? Which in another context is a powerful card, but he spends 4 mana sorcery speed.
Trade Wind Rider is very hard to make playable in any other context because
Pyroblast,
the card Swords of Plowshares is a very popular one in this pre-modern format. Not to mention Counterspell, not to mention Red Blast.
I played against that Trade Wind deck, I want to say in the top 4 of volleyball 1K, and I was on Green Red Oath, and the Pyroblasts were really good there, as were the Pyroclasms. And when you talked earlier about kind of like mana, what was the term we were using earlier? Mana
leverage?
Yeah, it just really made me, my mind immediately went to the Green Red Oath. I know we took it a different direction, but
yeah, no, that's a perfect example.
Just suppresses your opponent, buries them under spheres. That's a deck that I was happy to see return. I know it's not necessarily the funnest deck to play against sometimes, which is why I just tend to not play it at meetups ever. But that is, I'm happy to see it come back because it seemed like it was dead for a while. But that is the deck that I played at Lobstercon last year and did pretty well with.
You should play Terra Oath on the 18th. If you persist in not playing.
He's not going to tell you what he's going to play because
you're going to bring something that beats Daryl.
I'm just saying, like, you should, as a challenge, because like Dave Kaplan always on 12-12, right? Luis Neiman was on the Doctor last time, so you have like good players are going to be playing 12-12. If you want to challenge yourself, that's the way to go.
Like knowing that there will be multiple players on Mono Blue Dreadnought at the Manhattan meetups does inform what deck I bring to that versus Brooklyn, right? Because last time I took, was it January? I took the green red beatdown deck, and I got stomped by Dave Kaplan. And it was like, well,
okay, that deck is supposed to beat Dreadnought. Like what?
Well, it didn't.
That's what.
At the Manhattan meetup, the one that SWB won with the Coat of Arms Elves. God, he wins so many. I was looking over first round, and Chris C had defeated Luis with Spinesliver in play, and I thought he won the match, right? But Luis went undefeated before scooping in the last round to hit his train. Oh, but yeah, I was like, oh man, Spinesliver's there. I can't wait to make this deck pick. I'd had to add the word pick at the end of my sentence.
So my matchup against Dave Kaplan that meetup when I was playing Elves, and this was based on an Italian Nationals Elves list. I think the main difference I took was they had 2 Mishra's Helix, and I turned 1 Mishra's Helix into a Coat of Arms because it's fun, and because I don't ever want to draw 2 copies of Mishra's Helix. I just want the one. So that was the change I made to the deck, and then I tweaked the sideboard as well. But when I played against Dave Kaplan in game 1, he was on the play and had the turn 2 Dreadnought, and I won that game. And in game 2, he had the turn 1 Dreadnought, and I came very close, but didn't quite get there. And then game 3, we had more of a game, and I finally got to be on the play. But what happened in the first game was on Dave's second turn, after playing second land, just kind of took a minute or more to think, and then went, Dreadnought, Stifle. And I was just like, why would someone wait that long if they just have the nuts?
You're ranging your opponent now.
Yeah, maybe just doesn't have the free interaction to back that up. And so I was able to, I had a biorhythm in hand. I just played towards the turn 3 biorhythm, attack you for the win. And it got there. And I was just lucky that he didn't have the counter magic. But I had a sense that he didn't have the counter magic based on the read from the long pause.
You could have just gone Anger Scavenger Folk, and that would have done the same thing, probably.
Oh, Scavenger Folk, yeah.
But
my deck had neither of those cards.
It's kind of hard to Anger Scavenger Folk on turn 3 all the time, because it has your like turn 2 you have 3 mana Dreadnought and 1 mana, and then turn 4 you have 4 mana to have Mountain Anger GG. So it's like it's not necessarily a given that you can do that all the time.
Yeah.
On the play, it's good. On the play, it's better, right? But it's not a given. But overall, this Elves deck is, I guess, a little bit surprising in the sense that it plays more of the Air Elves because it plays 4 Birchlore Rangers, and it's doing more of like the Anthem Weenie thing, with 3 copies of Tribal Force Mage and 3 copies of Elvish Champion. And then to round out the kind of tech package of 2 Biorhythm, 2 Winter Orb, 4 Tangle Wire, 1 Mishra's Helix, and 1 Coat of Arms, which is just another Anthem. So what was your, were you surprised that you won every match? And then also, what was your reflection on like the deck as a whole?
I was surprised, yeah. That deck reminded me in some ways of my current favorite Legacy deck, which is a Gaea's Cradle deck that just plays to the board as fast as possible and tries to kind of overwhelm the opponent, or just
this is a 3/1/1 deck if I've ever seen it. This deck always has 3/1/1s. So what's
this deck is just I flood the board, hopefully I draw a big payoff and that's enough, or I'm going to have a hard time. And I didn't expect for the deck to always get there.
And you just have 3 call on the sideboard. Did you want to add sideboard Concordant Crossroads to this deck? I know that used to be the tech.
I would not mind it there. Yeah, I don't own any copies, so I just didn't. But I thought about it, and then I thought
they might have Concordant Crossroads at the Brooklyn Strategist. Maybe you could check it out on March 18th.
Yeah.
There's also
Like they have singles there, right? So you could, I think March 18th is a good time to maybe see if they.
This deck was very
before
fun,
before he swings through Meetup with his newly
No,
concording
so
crossword.
There's probably a standard tournament that day if you want to borrow a deck.
In December, took down a Manhattan Meetup with a different Joke Elves deck, and that one was at least 15 cards different, I think, because it had what's the Goblin Ringleader, but an Elf, the Sylvan Messenger.
Yeah.
And it had Plow Under.
Yeah.
And a bunch of other.
Did
more
it have
expensive
Brass
stuff.
Heralds too?
No Brass Heralds.
Okay.
But I did get to loop Sylvan Messengers.
Because that's like the food chain.
Deranged Hermits. Had
the
a bunch
food
of
chain
hermits.
version is that.
SWB's Joke Elves decks for deck picks. To be like, because people were asking why Plow Under was not played in premodern.
Oh man, Plow Under feels real good to cast.
Wait, you know what card is interesting to me that doesn't get played in premodern that was such a killer in block and in standard is Raphaelos. Right, that guy seems like he's like insane. Like he was a much higher performing card in competitive Magic than Priest of Titania was.
Yeah, I remember there was someone
at
my local card shop. I loaned him the Raphaelos and some Plow Unders, and he went to this event called U.S. Amateurs. It was at. Do you remember the Amateurs tournament? Like,
Yep.
You could not enter if you had a
pro
point.
Yep.
Yeah, and this was the very first one, and the best, like a dominant standard deck at the time was a Deranged Hermit Ponza deck. And this person from my hometown just removed the Deranged Hermits and put in a bunch of Earthquakes. And people were not prepared for that kind of innovation. So he said his opponents left their powder keg on 0 all day, waiting for his Hermit that wasn't in the deck. He Earthquaked all the other decks out of the game, and he won the event, and he won free Magic for the rest of his life. So he's still getting a booster box of every set ever released.
Amazing. Did
from
he
this
have
clever metagaming?
Did he have Skyshroud Poacher in his deck?
I don't know if that card existed at the time. I don't think it was printed yet.
Is free Magic for the rest of your life like secretly the most like awesome compounding deal of all time now that they released 20 sets a year?
Yeah, they did not think that one through. But
like
does he get
30th anniversary? Like does he get Universes Beyond? Like probably not.
I wonder how they handle that, right? They were not thinking about that in what was this, 1999?
I'd look real close to that contract and be like, yeah, where's my 30th anniversary packs? Bub.
They're in a dumpster. Right,
Yeah,
they
lit on
destroyed
fire.
the 30th anniversary stuff in order to not flood the market with the devalued cards.
In any case, Danger, what's up for Lobstercon? What are we thinking? Are we gonna play a green deck or are we gonna play a blue deck? Because that's kind of just where we are, right? Because you're not a blue deck guy. It's from what I've gathered, right?
I can play blue decks. I choose to play green decks most of the time. People seem to think of me as playing green decks, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah,
I think
but
of,
as a brain power conservationist as well.
Listen to this, Lanny. I don't think you were there. Tom Martell, a good friend of mine, Pro Tour champion, rolls into town one day. This is before Wyatt here was famous for taking down meetups, right? Had you ever taken down a meetup before this one? Was this your meetup?
This is my first. I think I'd made it to the finals before, but this is my first win.
It was your first win, right? So, Tom Hartel says to me, "Oh, I just want to play a deck of Swords to Plowshares. I've never really, played a deck of Swords to Plowshares in a long time." And I'm like, "Okay." So I make him the green-white Oath Ponza deck.
Cataclysm deck, right?
Yeah. Oh, the Oath Peluche deck, right? And I think he beats me in the third round. He goes up against Wyatt here in the fourth round, and he's just convinced he's going to win because SWB has the mono green version and he has the version with Swords to Plowshares, right? Not really understanding.
Before that match, he was looking at his phone and I could see his screen, and I think he received a text maybe from Sam Black that said, "You've already won."
Yeah, but I was just like, this seems like it should dramatically favor SWB. He can just pin all the white mana before deploying his Terravores, right? And then you just 2-0'd him, right?
Yeah. That.
Then
even with some suboptimal cards still in the deck, when it was still the mono green deck, and I had like 1 or 2 explorations, the deck really hadn't reached its final form yet.
I'm saying that's why people think he's a green player.
I think he's a green player because he plays green decks every single week with the exception of one.
Well, he also
4-0-8-0'd
the one that he didn't play green.
Yeah. But that leads me because Steven, you sent me a message. You were just like, what's the deal on the Bible? And I was like, here's the deal. You send $10 to the charity of David Raska's choice, and he gives you the Bible. And it's a really good deal because once you get that thing, you're going to start winning a lot more matches of Magic. It's like, I don't know how to explain it.
I 4080'd. That was fun, but I'm not going to do that for another meetup.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a little unfair for meetups. Although, sometimes we have to use the meetup to it's all we have. Like sickos in Massachusetts are playing weeklies, monthlies, and quarterlies. So, they have more choice to dick around. But for us, the 8 matches of Magic that Michael J plays at meetups are the only 8 that he'll play in a month. So it's like the only data he can get.
I mean, just in the last few weeks, I play tested at SWB's house. I play tested with Andy last night. You and I used to play on Friday night.
This is a recent development.
You started big time me with MTGO.
I mean, you can big time back by playing on MTGO, but this is neither here nor there.
It was better when you would just come to me and we would just play in person.
Oh, go figure.
Better for me.
But you haven't answered the question, Steven. Blue deck or green deck for Lobstercon 2025? What are we thinking?
Me,
what are the factors? What are the factors?
But I haven't decided. I really don't know what I'm going to play. One factor that definitely plays in big for me because it's so many rounds is conserving brain power throughout the day. So last year at Lobstercon, that's why I chose Red Green Oath because I had a lot of reps and I felt like I just didn't really have to think when I was playing the deck. Like I had to make a couple decisions on the day that were
a lot of the decisions are intuitive, and then when you don't, it's easier to identify when you're at a moment that you have to think harder, but most of the time you don't have to think because your opponent doesn't have any lands in play, or they have one land in play and you have Orishan import. You're like, what am I going to do?
And I resolved to play that deck 3 months before the event, and I just practiced that. I would go over to Andy's and we would practice against various matchups. I played it at the volleyball 1K.
Wait, how often were you going to Andy's to practice the Red Green Oath Ponza?
I was
Maybe
there
a week or two.
Every week or two?
Every couple weekends. We got together and played.
I think I told you, SWB was on Red Green Oath, and I was playing Replenish, which is supposed to be the deck that beats Red Green Oath, and he was beating me in games that I had a second turn Sabos Web. I was like, I
got a lot of practice,
right?
Against Replenish. I got a lot of practice against the Mono Blue Tide
control.
Andy was practicing. A lot of practice with Black White when that was still a deck.
Burn,
it's kind of interesting now because with Mike not coming to Lobstercon 2025, he can be the testing enemy. But I have also told Mike that he should start designing decks again. So not until after Lobstercon, I guess, or if he does, he needs to design them and then test them against himself before he brings them to the actual people going to the tournament. So it's kind of a complicated dynamic there. But what about out of left field, a black deck?
What about 23andMe?
No, shut up. Go ahead.
But I think it might be 24andMe.
Mike, I think you said you had to go somewhere. Is that?
We might add a miscalculation.
The discard decks are a great way to conserve brain power throughout the day.
Yeah.
You kind of just play what you draw.
Yeah. If your opponent has 0 cards in hand or 0 lands in play, that makes it easy.
I was so excited. That deck was so bad. The deck that is great, that is absolutely great from the Dress Crew data, I played it in 2 meetups, had excellent results, is Black Green Survival. I lost to you, Lanny, and then I went 4 and I lost to Kaplan on 12-12. But that's not bad. That's not bad results,
So unless I had the reps, I would not play a survival deck on a long day, because I think you need to play a deck enough to where you just know every time exactly what you're going to survival for and just have it figured out.
Advantages are it's pretty intuitive to play. I think that if you have the sideboard we designed, you're going to have a dramatic advantage against any other kind of fair mid-range deck. And it is an excellent matchup against 12-12 in a 3-game set. You're going to tend to lose game 1, but it is an excellent 3-game side. So
what if I was playing 3-color Dreadnought with Mystic Enforcer in my sideboard?
So you suddenly make yourself... this is... what would stop me from combo killing you if you had a deck that wasn't even Gush Foil?
No, I have Gush Foil, Mystic Enforcer.
Okay, so you have worse mana than the black green pitiless rack deck. It sounds horrible.
I would defeat Survival Rock.
I cannot Bone Shredder you. That is true.
All right, so what if we cut the Dreadnoughts?
Terrageddon for sure, but I think Terrageddon, you take a lot of game actions with that deck. You get to activate Weathered Wayfarer a lot, and I think that as I've gotten more reps with it, it's become more second nature. I just know what I'm going to do every turn before I do it. But the learning curve to that deck, I think, requires a bit of brain power.
It is pretty high, yeah. I would agree with that.
What if you took
might shy away from it from an 8 or 9 round day because there's just so much deck touching and tutoring. You're just tutoring every turn.
What if you took your deck that you won the meetup with, and then your sideboard strategy was to side out Weathered Wayfarer, Call the Herd, and Exalted Angels? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6,
to an
7
Oath Sphere
cards.
deck.
Yeah, just become an Oath Sphere deck after sideboarding. Like, and
I like that idea.
Like, I feel like that deck would be absolutely awesome because your plan A is excellent. Your plan B is exactly what Lanny's talking about in terms of being able to transform in certain matchups. You cover a lot of bases, and I mean, just like, Oath Gaia's Blessing is a classic.
You'd have to cut a lot, though, because you'd have to change your Oath monsters away from Terravor.
I don't think so. I think that you could have you don't have to just win with one Terravor swing. You just gain advantage, right? The card Oath of Druids prevents your opponent from playing Magic in the way that they want to, and this deck is going to have the ability to Gaia's Blessing for Sword Splashers over and over again. I mean, maybe, I don't know, if you want to play a Shard Phoenix in your sideboard, you can. If you want to play a Reckless Charge in your sideboard, you can.
Depending on your opponent, you might just cut the blessings. You go for huge Terravors.
I think one Reckless Charge in the sideboard of a deck that can produce red mana is actually...
Oh, flash it back. That's fun.
You put it in the graveyard with the Oath, and then you just kill them. That, maybe you play 2... you could actually side down to like 2 Terravors, side out the Oaths. You have to side in 9 cards then, right? But 4 of them are Oaths, 2 are Reckless Charge, 3 more.
Yeah, you don't want to board in Oath Sphere, right? Because you're targeting different things with Oath and Sphere. Like, you want to be Oath or Sphere, not both.
But I think that is actually... Because this deck is so clean in Game 1. It's so excellent. I think that Zernorb sucks in Game 1, though, because you don't have the Enlightened Tutor. That was an artifact of Rich having an Enlightened Tutor.
Rich had a tutor. I took it out, and I thought the deck does see a lot of cards when you're shuffling every turn, and you have Sylvan, so I didn't hate having a single Abundance in the Zernorb still in there, but those are definitely
Abundance is sweet, because once you get it, you're playing a different format than your opponent. But I mean, is it a second Exalted Angel not better than the Zernorb in Game 1? Zernorb
it very well may be. Angel's really good in that deck because of the City of Traders. 2 City of Traders, 3 Risk Groves, and the 4 Mox Diamonds. So
I can attest that the Angel's really good.
I feel like we're just...
Turn 2 flip Angel's very real.
This is just returning to the Patrick Burt deck that spawned all of this. That was just Sphere of Resistance, Ports, Wasteland, Terravor, Exalted Angel, Oath of Druids. Like, you
you could cut the blessings for more Call of the Herds, right? And you could just be all in on, like, I'm leveraging City of Traders to put power to the board and then cast Armageddon early.
I mean,
and often.
I think that the Gaia's Blessing Abundance aspect of the deck is what makes it the deck that I want to play.
Mm-hmm.
It has a unique identity relative to other Terravor decks, in my opinion.
I mean,
had a go on.
No, you go ahead.
I was saying I had a weird matchup spread that night. Just like 2 pit rack decks, Beefcake, and then Goblins. So
beating Goblins is no small feat with the Terravor deck.
That was tough. Yeah. Took a little luck.
I think Terravor's
luck had to run dry
against Goblins
because I had trimmed some of the Pyroclasms out of the board. I think if I had left more of them in the board, I would have been much less worried about Goblins.
SWB, what's the natural sideboard? Like, the only version of this I've seen is this like super blue hating sideboard of 4 Hidden Gibbons, 5 Red Blasts. What's supposed to be there?
Oh,
well, it's a little bit weird because this deck is like a reflection of a reflection, right? So the first version of the deck is Rich basically saying, like, I like this Terragon deck, but I would like it even more if it played Gaia's Blessing. So he just
build had 4 Pyroclasms on the board. It might not have had Hidden Gibbons, and it probably had more tutor targets, like a Sphere of Law and just a couple other tutor targets that I can't place right now.
I mean, I'd Enlightened Tutor for Hidden Gibbons, but either way.
Maybe you can tutor for a compost with these black.
Lady, you won't cast a first turn backbreaking first turn Gerard's Verdict, but you will Enlighten Tutor.
It's not as backbreaking as you think it is.
I've been on the wrong side of it, dude.
That's because you're playing red. Like, you did the one thing that you're not allowed to do anymore in this pre-modern year of our Lord 2025. It's just like,
but I feel like red might be back already. I feel
it's crazy how fast the format
it was
swings.
crazy because, like, I I was so excited. I was just like, I can't wait to play this deck because I'm just a deck toucher. I just touch the cards and make deck picks and then put them in boxes and they're off to the side. I make another deck, right? I'm just like a card toucher. I'm like, I'm going to get to play and I'm going to play the matchup that this deck was designed to win. And I got Raffle Stomps and then we switched decks and the deck continued to lose. Against
but that's
we had 2 goblins in the top 8, 2 burn in the top 16.
That's not the only reason red is dying, right? It's dying more so because of Dreadnought, and it is a big difference to have goblins be performing rather than burn. Like if you look at like regardless of the results of your Pitiless Rack situation, the burn matchup against Pit Rack is still better. Right? Like, you know, like, sure, Burn's probably, you know, very favored against decks containing the rack. And then against decks containing the rack and Tempting Worm, maybe you lost some points and maybe the result of your testing was borne out that you didn't lose enough points where it mattered. But, you know, again, I maintain that if you're going to take a metagame and you're going to, like, replace a lot of these walks for Burn, and I define walks as, like, decks like Elves or Goblins or...
Land Stills are in 2 different categories.
Land Stills with they're
one of them's a much more plausible deck to it.
I think they're like if you're a burn sicko, you should just be beating those decks at a frequency that you're very very comfortable
Elves,
to face
I
those
agree.
decks.
Goblins, it's just not that dominant. It's good. It's not the
Mike,
same as Elves.
I've played like 10 matches on camera, and eagle-eyed listeners to the Spike Colony podcast might identify that Massachusetts quarterly champion Ian Adams was indeed my testing partner for the Burn versus Goblins video that I most recently released. So right now, the most awarded Goblins player in the world,
the most awarded Goblins player of the last week,
fell 3-1 or something in matches to my Burn deck. Like, I just don't think that people understand what they're doing on the burn side, and that includes Michael J. And that's the subject of another podcast in which I would go out and say, like, I actually think it's insane to me. Like, I was always just like, oh, Aaron Dix invented this bauble burn deck and he won every tournament, so it's probably better than whatever the alternative is. And then people were like, oh, you have to play Shock instead of Seal Fire because it's instant.
Seal Fire's way better.
And then Aaron Dix was just like, I like that my opponent doesn't know that I have a Shock in my hand. And I just like, oh, Aaron Dix, he's such a genius. He uses his ability to make it so that his opponents don't know that he has Shock. And then I just like stopped for a second and I was just like, wait a second. There's only 12 instant speed cards in this deck, and the other 48 are sorcery speed. It's like, we're like, oh no, what if you draw Seal of Fire off of Ursa Bubble? What if you draw Jackal Pup, Mog Fanatic, Ball Lightning, Grim Lavamancer, Curse Scroll, or Mountain?
What if you don't have a 1-drop and you're going second, but you have a Seal of Fire in the mirror match?
Yeah, it's like
man, is that good?
But what if you had Seal of Fire and Bobble, and then you just like go Mountain Pass, and you actually have no 1-drop because you have Bobble, and then you draw your card, and it's Mog Fanatic. Like, all of these things can and will happen to you in the burn deck, so much so that I'm just like, I actually can't believe that Bobble is a thing, because the upside is like, you don't have to play 8 Shocks, which you just don't have to, because you can play a land that deals 2 damage instead of a card that deals 2 damage. So you can get insane value from a land. Like, Barbarian Ring is so insane. You can like tap it 4 times and then shock your opponent. None of your cards, it's like so good. I was like, why aren't we playing all of them? I'd play 6.
Like, you pointed out this to me where I had posted that modern deck where I had 8 of the Red Horizon canopies, right? And like no combos, like just within my deck. And you're like, I mean, a Barbarian Ring is just that and better. And
yeah.
I'm like, wow.
It's like you get the card right away. You
so
cast
good.
it for 0 mana. Anyways, and
That's
rant on burn. Like,
yeah, I'm off Bobble personally. Yeah. And the last time I played Burn in a meetup and did well was with the the Call of the Herd and the Sideboard Splash.
You won that one though, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, like the others, like all of the others with one.
No, when he played Pit Rack, he didn't win.
That's true. That's a good point. Didn't win with Pit Rack. I guess that means Pit Rack
Not
kind of
close.
sucks.
Decks that I like came close with but haven't won with, so I didn't need to run them back, would include Pit Rack and Survival Madness.
You let me know when you're gonna play Pit Rack again. I had a good night that night.
Wait, Survival Madness is kind of sick. What are you just kind of sleeving up, quote unquote, stock Survival Madness, or have you got anything?
The
interesting
Force
going
Squee
on?
build, yeah. And I remember, I think I played against Mike. Was that a finals?
Do you
that
have
we
the
played? And I
cave-ins?
had,
I did not play against you on Survival Madness ever.
and
I don't think so.
I just had like, half of the red. I didn't have the pitch spell for the red card because I had to mulligan so low to get a functioning mana in my opening hand in like the deciding game. Like, so I had to go down to like 5. I ended up with a pyrokinesis and nothing to pitch. But a lot of the times with that deck, because you're playing non-allied colors, the blue and green mana can be a real pain.
I don't like that
So you
deck.
have both.
You need island as your first land, and then you want every subsequent land to be forest, and that is really strange.
You do generally play like 4 counter spells, right? So you do want to. Yeah, there's a real tension between wanting that and then also wanting to activate your survival. But ideally, you want to like careful study on turn 1, right? Like make a lizard, pitch a squee, something like that.
With days backup.
Yeah, it feels good. And like when I was playing that last fall, it did the best against Andy's mono blue deck of anything. Like that sure felt good.
Survival
So
Madness
that's a
is
deck I
kind
would
of
consider.
Survival Madness is kind of good against Dreadnought, depending on vibes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because you can throw your Gilded Drake in there, and you can play maybe 2 Waterfront Bouncers main.
You can play any number of Waterfront Bouncers. Like, you're pretty happy to have that
Any
card
you
in
want.
Survival Madness. I mean, the big thing that's like very subtle about Survival Madness is that you don't have to compromise between playing threats on your turn or holding up counter spells on your opponent's turn or naturalize on your opponent's turn. You just get to have both, so long as you have Wild Mongrel or Survival.
It is a
I'll
difficult
probably
deck
play
to
that
hate
deck
out.
soon.
Yeah.
Like, you can't, how do you hate this deck out? Perish? Like, you don't,
Yeah.
Wild Mongrel doesn't even stay green, necessarily.
Oath the Druids will do it, though.
Oh, yeah.
This deck has a 33% win rate against Mono Blue Dreadnought, according to Duress Crew.
Oof, that's rough.
That is not great, Laney.
That's
my
not
favorite
compelling.
my favorite data point on that is the 100% Elves versus Stasis data point. I chuckle every time I look at that.
Yeah, how
Yeah,
could Elves lose?
surprising
They have
to
8 cards
nobody.
that say untapped target
Impossible.
creature.
Yeah, can't beat a Quirion Ranger.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. 3 and 6
Well,
against
also-
Dreadnought.
You can also discard any number of cards if you want in order to not die to
Yeah, there are multiple.
they can only damage you with Black Vice, right? You're just like, one of your cards just says discard cards, right?
So I have recently been moving new frame cards and picking up just any gaps in my pre-modern collection, just turning new frame cards into pre-modern cards. So I'm picking up a Gilded Drake. So I'm priced into playing a Gilded Drake deck soon at a meetup.
All right.
There's
I think
new
you should,
board
but we should do
games,
something different with Survival Madness, though. I think we should kind of tweak the numbers.
right?
Yeah.
Is the blue the reason that Survival Madness is good? Like, one of the things I was thinking about is
So quick pause here. It is possible that Survival Madness is not good.
so I was
Right.
thinking, like, there, on the subject of me making decks, right? Like, there are just green survival decks or green touch red survival decks of ages past that were like pretty effective. Like, decks that do stuff like Stampeding Wildebeest with 8 walls. You could play like a bunch of Squeeze with Stormbinds and Wild Mongrels. You could play Hermit Druids.
So-
not combo Hermit Druids, just value Hermit.
Right. But this is actually really interesting, right? Because there's a lot of ways a survival deck can look in this format, and they all have different things that they're good and bad at. And the blue is very important because if you look at it'd be kind of fun to kind of go deep on this, but I'm just going to tell you the vibe, right? So, like, first of all, survival decks, they're all really bad against Replenish. And it just happens when your deck is all creatures and 1 higher leverage enchantment that the deck with all ways to remove creatures forever and your high leverage enchantment, and like what you give up to have all creatures is you have less hand interaction, you have less stack interaction, etc. So they're all typically bad against Replenish. They're all typically kind of good against Dreadnought and kind of good against midrange, right? Because like you just have this enchantment, it comes down on turn 2, it's hard to answer, and it's like a value engine for the entire rest of the game. So like control and mid range are like generally going to have trouble with it. So it's like, why do you play Survival Madness versus Trade Wind Madness, or Trade Wind Survival versus Black Green Survival versus Elves versus Red Green Survival Beatdown, that BK was playing with? And I think that the answer to that question is interesting. Like, I think it's like interesting to play Survival Rock, which has like a lot less of this like I'm gonna win like the next turn. Add Feb in there. Has a lot less of this like I'm gonna win next turn aspect to it, but has a lot more of this like my deck kind of does things if I don't draw survival, and like the hand disruption's good. Survival Madness, which has this like stack interaction and just like no green mana sources, so it's just like all I'm gonna do is put a Basking Root Wall into play one at a time, but I hold up Counterspell every turn, so like Basking Root Wall is enough. So like Elves, which is just like Elves is Elves, like super explosive. It has like anger, like Survival's just like this combo enabler. Feb's a combo enabler, etc., etc.
Because a Survival Madness deck, right? The lizards fly, the mongrels fly, and then you have all these squeeze, and your mongrels are huge flying, and you close out a game really fast.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I
like that.
It's weirdly faster than, it's certainly faster than Survival Rock, right?
Yeah,
Kind
there
of,
was
kind
a
of.
good-looking.
I played against a
survival deck, Sam Smoxfield.
I
That caught my eye.
I played against Survival Rock in the casual room, and they had Survival online for like 10 turns, and they just
What deck were you?
they just did. I was playing Grotog.
Like they should have just been able to combo kill you.
Well, they weren't playing combo kill, obviously, but the weirder other thing is that they weren't playing Genesis. So they tutored up their one Bone Shredder, and then they cast it, and I was like, I'll counter that.
That was it.
And then they're like,
Good game.
whatever. So like, I actually sat there for the next like 20 turns with an 11/11 Quirion Dryad and a 9/9 Quirion Dryad, and I was just like, draw go, waiting until I could get to my Mystic Enforcer, of course, to close the game out. But the survival rock deck is just really not interested in killing its opponent, and it's really, really bad at dealing with a creature.
Well, that's why Phil Bunch of Numbers plays Tempting Worm. But the thing that's interesting to me is this, like, of the many Tempting Worm decks you could play in Premodern, this was like one of the ones that was kind of putting Tempting Worm on the map, and it's like the worst in this deck. It's just like the most mediocre Tempting Worm.
I'm just gonna throw it out right out there. It's like, don't cast Tempting Worm in 2025 Year of Lord, because you know what I'm gonna put into play once you cast Tempting Worm?
My own Tempting Worm.
Mystic Enforcer. If you Tempting Worm me, I put Mystic Enforcer in play. Are you ever going to win a game?
Sylvain has been playing Mystic Enforcer. He was playing a Bant Threshold at the last Manhattan meetup, and he was containing Survival Rock decks whose only answer to a let's go with a 3/3 for 4 was Bone Shredder.
There you
go. They wouldn't be able to get past, and he would eventually draw his Armageddon, and
And as an added
cast
caveat,
Tempting Worm was probably the last time I'll cast Tempting Worm, because I cast it against Dave Kaplan with that green-red deck, which in hindsight I should not have brought it in that matchup. He did not have any additional lands. He did not have the Gush. These are things that could go wrong. But he did have 2 Dreadnoughts in hand, which meant that he got to put them both into play and sack one to the other and keep one.
I played a Duress against Andy last night, and I took his Mana Leak on turn 1, and he's just like, that was a really weird take. Why didn't you take, I can't, no, actually I took his Parallax Tide, and instead of something else, it was like a counterspell, it's much more functional. And I'm like, as YOLO, and I just played my Tempting Worm, and I almost won that game. But
yeah.
I did not win, but I almost won. And
so what you're saying is Pitless Rack does not defeat Mono Blue Tide.
I got one game. I got a game, and my Tempting Worm did a lot of work. It didn't finish the game. It eventually took down a Mishra's Factory and a Fairy Conclave, but he was also scared. Like, he couldn't come in for a long time because he was afraid of getting double blocked, and I was really just bluffing off of cards in hand, and I knew he had a Mana Leak, so I couldn't do very much. And then I was just like, I eventually won that game, but it was not a great matchup, no.
Black-green deck with Worm almost made it to the finals at the last meetup. It lost to Goblins in round 3, and it was really close. I think it came down to the Black-green deck having a City of Brass and the Goblins player having a Port, and just that being the
nice
last 2 points that it needed. But otherwise it looked like the Black-green deck would have won.
I think
Broccoli Soup deck?
Simon was playing 5C Gators last week.
I played against him.
Okay.
I thought it was Broccoli Soup.
Was it Sylvain or was it Simon? Well, Sylvain wasn't there.
That's what I'm thinking of.
Yeah,
so
yeah,
Sylvain plays broccoli soup, right? And I think Simon was playing more of what we've been talking about with worm, stupor.
He had like Carnophage Rancor against me.
Yeah. So he's playing a little bit of everything. He's got Gator's tech and he's got Tempting Worm.
What
He
is
probably
Gators? I'm sorry.
It's Negator. It's 5-color
Negator.
Negator. Yeah.
But he might be on like Drinker of Sorrow.
He had Drinker of
not
Sorrow.
actual
Exactly.
Negator.
Yeah.
Yeah, he played. It was interesting. He played Tempting Worm against me on Beefcake, and I'm like, what an odd choice. And I put 4 permanents in play, including additional 5/5s, and he's like, well.
He played. He cast Negator against me in a game 1. Actually, I was playing Enchantress, and it was kind of funny because I have Seal of Fire in that Enchantress deck, but also they can just sacrifice a Sarcomancy and a Gemstone Mine with 1 counter on it. That's value.
That was the old City of Traders tech. You play Negator, City of Traders, Sarcomancy is the combo.
Yeah. What are you gonna do? 7 power. Some of it tramples. Nobody plays Lightning Bolt. It's banned in this format. Can't play it anymore. It's pretty there. Do you have any tasty brews that you're thinking about, or are you just going to? I mean, what's your plan? Are you going to mainline? Did you pick your deck that you're going to work on for the next 2 months? It's only 2 months. We're in March.
No, I haven't picked that yet. I do have a couple that I have put together that I just haven't played at a meetup yet, but have played just kind of casually. There's like a blue LED Storm deck that makes a fast hunting pack.
He annihilated Beefcake with that, with no mercy.
Turn 3 hunting packs for 10 when we played.
Yeah, I can see how Ernum Jin struggles against multiple
40 power.
I had
here's 40 power,
and he also has to give one of them Forest Walk.
I had 4 straight 4th turn kills, and lost all 4 games.
Yeah.
So I want to play that, but if there seems to be a lot of black decks, a lot of bottomless pit decks and discard decks, and it's not the time to bring that to a meetup.
Manhattan is the land of 12/12s. Brooklyn is the land.
True.
Of
Brooklyn is the land of bottomless
nonsense.
pits, right?
Yeah. Including you.
And then,
like the last meetup I won in Brooklyn, you were on bottomless pit.
I think also in my deck box I have the shallow grave deck. That's a deck it's interesting, but I think that deck to me feels more like you evaluate your opening hand and like you win or you don't.
Yes.
And I think I'm more inclined to play decks that are a little bit more like chess than like poker. Like
No. That deck is like blackjack. It's blackjack versus poker versus chess. Tin Fins is blackjack.
Okay.
Oh, Lanny, what kind of decks?
I like
do I
fair
play?
decks.
What kind of decks do you play? I think you play checkers decks that you feel like you navigate with like with the prowess of a chess player. But you're really just like
Tiddlywinks.
Yeah. You're just kind of like at the kids' table, but you're like, I'm masterfully like moving my black piece diagonally, which is the only place that it can go. But yeah,
I need to know this because I need to know what legacy deck to play, because apparently I'm not allowed to play.
You should probably play a blackjack deck. You should probably play whatever the legacy equivalent of Fluctuator is.
It's I guess the red aggro deck, right? With
the turn one Blood Moon deck. And then if that doesn't work, I have no other plan. Or have a Goblin Chariot. So my plan is Blood Moon turn 1, and like you play basic planes, and you're like, okay, my second plan is Goblin Chariot, sacrifice my Blood Moon to Lava Axe you.
SWB, tell him the cards in this white weenie deck in Legacy. It's unreal.
Yeah, a deck that might be a good just to the legacy choice, like traditional mono black Reanimator or black red all in Reanimator. Like those are also good. Linear.
Black Red Reanimator is actually a pretty nuanced deck. It has a lot of turn 1 I wins, but like you kind of have to struggle and scrap for like those weird games that you like take whatever turns to win. Sideboarding with it is kind of difficult. Like I'm sure Michael J can unmask Dark Ritual and Tomb Reanimate, but like it's kind of tricky to do the other thing.
I lost to so the first round.
It's hard to mulligan. It's really hard to mulligan with Black Red
against
Reanimator.
a black deck. My first turn was like land exploration, double Mox, double Urza Saga. I won that one, and then my card that I had left was Life from the Loam. I won that one pretty easily. That's pretty good. But then I lost to just what's his name, Dothy Voidwalker.
Yeah.
I can't use any cards, right? And like I'm just playing a green deck, and I can't do any actions or he'll steal it. And then I was just like, how do I beat this, and like Andy was like, you don't really. You just kind of have to make a 2020 and hope you can't answer.
Yeah.
It.
Like that format's in a weird spot because it's just everyone is just like shove. Everyone just shoves something powerful at the other, and then the games end. And that's why I've become much more interested in format like premodern in recent years.
Where you like play the game. Yeah. So
you actually play a game.
What I would recommend is you. I think Black Red Reanimator is an excellent deck, excellent choice for somebody who effectively needs to make the fewest amount of decisions possible in order to survive a tournament, and is like most likely to just kind of accidentally win a match. I think that's super good, but you have to like you have to sit there with somebody who knows the deck and knows how to play it, and do like 100 mulligans, like 100 opening hands.
What? I don't know. Like
YouTube videos, I'm sure.
I've been watching YouTube videos.
Yeah, like a bunch of opening hands. Because if I'm pulling up Goldfish now, and correct me if I'm wrong, is Blue Black Reanimator still the top Reanimator deck?
Definitely.
Okay, so
Blue Red is just more of an all-in.
It's much more all-in. Okay, that's tricky because I think if you're like you still
I
should give Michael J a powerful deck, not just like
I played against a deck. I thought it was so cool. It was just black blue, like a standard deck, but he had like Brainstorm and Fetch lands. But it was just like, Momentum Breaker. This town ain't big enough. Like, and it's incredible in Legacy, right? Because like
the missing context here, by the way, is that later this month in New York City, there is a Team Trios Eternal, like the team seats will be Modern, Legacy, and Vintage, and that is the event coming up.
Right, and Michael J, of course,
investigated.
Yeah, Michael J, of course, can't play any formats besides, I guess, Standard and Premodern, and so he's taking the Legacy seat graciously. I got one out of left field. Hear me out. Why don't we just play Stifle Knot in Legacy?
Andy played it last night.
I love it.
1 and 2.
It's so good.
Well, is it so good?
I've had luck with it, and I've seen people do well with it, and you get to do cool things. Like if you're on the build with that Curie card, you get to turn that into a 12/12 trampler that draws you.
I'm not going to. Let's not talk about that card.
Okay, let's not go down that.
Rich may or may not
Dreadnought,
have an aneurysm if we started reading that card. So we'll, for the sake of Dr. Rich Che, the good doctor, not the evil doctor like Dr. David.
We'll talk about this later. Dreadnought is, I think, a fine choice. Sorry, before we went down the Legacy rabbit hole, you had a question about what was it about a white weenie deck?
Well, that was a Legacy deck. That's a Legacy deck.
With
we're still in the Legacy rabbit hole. We should wrap this up. Michael has somewhere to go.
Right on. Yeah.
SWB not locked in for Lobstercon yet. Not going to play
might
Hunting
be playing
Park.
in a standard tournament on the
Not going to be playing blue.
Could happen.
The pre-modern meetup, which it makes sense. It's really nice, really near his house.
I mean, here's your opportunity to do a little bit of, messing with us. What are you going to play? What are you going to play on the next meetup?
Maybe Tribe.
Tribe? Nice.
Or, like Oratog, Ephemerif Enchantress, Aggro Enchantress.
Oh my god, he's
like my
throwing?
spice deck.
He's throwing?
Nice.
I guess the two Elves decks you had were one hand tied behind your back, and you still took them.
Yeah. At this point, I think he can just kind of get away with anything. Tribe. Okay. I actually have to ask. What are you going to do with Tribe? Are you doing the Gush thing? Are you doing Quiet Speculation Tribe? Are you like what's the
probably the Quiet Speculation list? There's a friend back home in the Southeast who's a big proponent of this deck. I have yet to sleep it up or look at it, but. I look at the list. I'm like, why are you playing Quiet Spec? Shouldn't you just play Intuition? Or there's a lot of questions I have when I look at the list, but it seems to do well.
Yeah, I am an Intuition fan, so you don't have to sell me on that.
Is so specific to the things the Tribe deck wants to do, and it is cheaper, right? So when you're like, you get a card back with Intuition, not really. All three of the cards you
no. Intuition is an instant, and your deck contains counterspells. Like that's the only reason. Like your deck contains counterspells and you cast Intuition and instant speed. Like that's not a hard interaction to get by people. But my follow-up question, we're playing Tribe. We got green mana. We got white mana. We got Threshold Enablers. Mystic Enforcer, baby. I mean,
sure. Throw it in.
The one thing I would say is Tribe, according to Sam, is the absolute best deck against
Sam's Enchantress.
Specifically Sam. You cannot beat Tribe.
I may or may not bring Sam's Enchantress deck to that meetup. I just need to see.
Oh, well, then I'll be on tribe.
Yeah. But how many Mystic Enforcers do you have, Mike? Like, do you have them on hand? Do you have to dig through a
set.
Yeah.
Hold on, I'll just look.
Yeah. Pull out
Maybe I
a
could throw
set
the
for me.
Enforcer into my green-white Enchantress aggro deck.
I'm sure I own some.
I
assume I have a set.
I tested Mystic Enforcer, and it's a 6/6 flyer. Like, I don't know what to say other than like a 6/6 flyer is really good against a bunch of decks.
Kibler
in
used to call it a dragon, right? So
yes,
it's Rith. He used to call it a dragon. So the history of this card is Grand Prix Las Vegas. Mikey P won the main event with The Rock. I won the PTQ with The Rock. We tested together, same 75. The unsung deck from that event was in 9th place, actually, which was Pro Tour Hall of Famer Alan Comer with the early version of Miracle Grow, which I believe had Gaia's Skyfolk and Wild Mongrel.
Nice.
So I came back to New York, won like a $1,000 tournament with that deck before the internet or whatever.
Yeah, and back when $1,000 meant something.
And but people didn't know about all this deck movement and stuff. But then Kibler and Ben Rubin saw it, and they're like, well, what if we just took out all these cards and put in Swords to Plowshares and Mystic Enforcer? And this is a format where you can play, Taiga, right?
Duels, right?
Yeah.
Were you testing Land Grant?
Yeah, I think I had Land Grant and Gush. It's been a long... Yeah, I'm sure we had Land Grant, right? And so they made a deck, and the deck file was sickestever.deck. So every time I wrote about it, it's like small s, sickestever.deck was how it was noted. And I think Kibler and Rubin both top 8'd a Grand Prix with it. And then Alexander Witt won the Masters with it. And it was basically what you're talking about, Lanny. Let's call it Groatog with Mystic Enforcer instead of Psychotog is the closest thing you can talk about in pre-modern, I think. But they had thresholdish stuff, right? I think they had Werebear.
Yeah. I mean, Werebear. So it's kind of weird where how the scaling works, where it's 1/1 for 1 with Shroud, pretty good. 2/2 Druid for 1, not very good. Or sorry, 2/2 Druid. 1/1 Druid for 2, not very good. 4/4 Druid for 2,
pretty good.
It's fine. I mean, there's Tempting Worm, so it's only so good compared to Tempting Worm. And then it's 6/6 flyer protection from black for 4 is amazing. All your deck has to do is have Threshold. And granted, there's Phyrexian Furnaces and Tormod's Crypts and Withered Wretches in this format, but all things considered,
I mean, the decks that have Withered Wretch, etc., might just lose to a 3/3 protection.
Exactly.
Doesn't need to fly.
Mm-hmm. I look at this card and I'm just this is actually the biggest scary monster in pre-modern. It costs half as much as an Exalted Angel almost. It costs half as much as an Eternal Dragon, that's for sure. It just nothing trumps it on the battlefield, and it has flying, and it creates inevitability. One of the crazy things about Psychotog in the Groatog style deck was just oh yeah, this is just what you need to do if you want to do 10 damage and kind of one turn them. But now that there's more junk on the battlefield, you end up being exile, get through your Wall of Blossoms. Oh no, he got another Wall of Blossoms.
It's tough. The fact that it costs 4 mana instead of 3 mana is a big deal, and the big deal is you don't have Taiga, you don't have Savannah. You're locked into Painlands for the most part. Painlands, or what are you imagining? City of Brass?
I don't know for sure. I mean, I have a few ideas. One is just Groatog sort of gets there because it has all it needs is the plains and then 1 of 8 Mox Diamond City of Brass, and then 4 mana, which is not a given. But it happens. It happens eventually.
It's not impossible.
Yeah, guess what else also happens eventually? Threshold. So these are both things that we're not in a hurry to get to. But okay, so I'm going to scroll all the way back, which is just that I think I had a discussion about this. I don't know if I had it online on the podcast or where, so pardon me if I'm repeating myself. But the thing about Groatog that has been the current struggle is that Nimble Mongoose, Werebear's never been in contention, but I guess you can maybe consider it. But Nimble Mongoose and Call of the Herd were really, really good against certain decks, and then Meddling Mage 2 are really, really good against certain decks and really, really bad against certain decks. And the thesis of Groatog is not to draw more cards than your opponent, just to have better cards at every mana cost than your opponent. So the fact that Call the Herds and Nimble Mongoose can't get through, and Meddling Mage, of course, can't get through Wall of Blossoms, can't get through Mistress Factories, can't get through Call the Herd tokens, trigger Oath of Druids unfavorably, etc., etc. Like, all of these things really, really work against these creatures. And then so you're kind of sitting there and you're playing your Grotog deck and you're like, I kind of have this dead card. So Quirion Dryad effectively solves all these problems pretty well, because, like, okay, maybe it comes down and doesn't block right away, but within 1 or 2 turns it'll start blocking. But it was missing that sort of like thing.
Did you ever have Submerge?
Negative. That's the free card, right?
Yeah, I had Submerge when I won with that, because I didn't have white though. But
yeah, I mean, that's
Plow, it's better, but Submerge seemed pretty good. I remember submerging a Spirit
so
Monger.
good.
Submerge against a Terravor is definitely not bad, and then of course Submerge against like whatever. But that's like the problem is like Grotog barely wants to play. Like, it has to play like the Red Hate. It has to play Chill, right? But barely wants to, because
I don't think you have to play the Red Hate anymore. Red's dead.
well, yeah, that's obviously on my mind. Don't think I'm not thinking about that. But anyway, so all of these things kind of end up rolling into consideration, where it's just kind of like, okay, like, I really don't want to be in 3/3 land anymore, and 4/4 land honestly isn't that much better. If I'm worried about random Tempting Worm or whatever, and flying and evasion is like something that Grotog has sort of never had access to. I don't think that you could really feasibly ever play One Wonder because it's just too hard to get into the graveyard.
The original list ran Gaia Skyfall, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I think it was before the card Wonder had, because Wonder's in the second set, right? So like Wild Mongrel.
Wonder is Judgment, I believe. So it's the third.
But yeah, I don't believe Wonder had been printed yet, but Wild Mongrel was, I think, a relatively new card at the time, and it was in the deck. It was like Wild Mongrel and Gaia Skyfolk, and I think some people played River Boa even. Like, if you just think about like the distribution of available creatures.
Right.
That's right. You
because-
can Wonder, right? You can Intuition for it. You can just cut the... Yeah.
The card that was an underperformer a lot of the time was Quirion Dryad itself, right? Because like Laney said, it's a 1/1 if you don't have a handful of cantrips.
Yeah. I mean, the important part is that Quirion Dryad can do everything, whereas Nimble Mongoose can only ever be a 3/3. Call the Herd can only ever be a 3/3 that exposes you to Powder Keg and Parallax Wave pretty unfavorably. And it's just also like, it's weird. Like, I was like the most hyped person on Call of Herd and Plan. I'm like 3/3 for 3. It's like the most efficient thing in the pre-modern format. And then 4/4 for 3 that you don't have to draw a card to play is like the most card advantageous thing in the format. Like, I play Grotog. It's like, it's actually really hard to just spend 3 mana, like, when you don't want to, but you have to.
I
have a build of this in my
Winter Orb main deck.
Oh, yeah.
I think it had.
I have a build of Grow that I've been looking at with Land where we cut the Quirion Dryad.
I have heard this. I've seen this. I have. There was a player, non-American player, recently that played 6 threats, 3 Call the Herd and 3 Psychotog, and then was just basically a Terragon deck with no Terragons, right? A blue Terragon deck, right? So it just like had a lot of Armageddon, and it could do a lot of things. And I also went to battle with a list with 3 Quirion Dryads, and I can't really wrap my head around 0 or less than 4 at this point in time, just because it's so good if your opponent doesn't have like removal or is removal light. Like, a lot of these decks are like over leveraged on drawing Swords of Plowshares once, and then if they draw Swords of Plowshares twice, like counter 1 and have a second Quirion Dryad is definitely decent. But
I saw the list you're talking about. They didn't face any Plowshares decks in their tournament write-up, I noticed.
I mean,
and they didn't have Mage to protect them from it either.
Oh, I mean, does your experimental Grotog deck have Mage?
Yeah, it has Mage, and it has a lot of Call of the Herd.
Yeah.
And it has more Intuitions.
But this is a thing I think we were talking about a few weeks ago.
Oh, so you're just smashing my 2 favorite decks together. Best Attack and Grotog. Yeah.
Just deck identity you're talking about, right? Like, we're just like, well, I feel like Grotog has to have this, and you start saying stuff about deck identity. But the reality is, like, decks just have identity because we give them names, and we give them names in order to shortcut stuff and describe things that we understand better. There would have been a time when it would have been difficult for people to differentiate a goblins deck from a burn deck, right? Just like, oh, here are two aggressive red decks, and they have some cards in common, right? They have like Bog Fanatic in common. You know, they don't have a lot of cards in common, right? But
yeah, before Scourge, it was
like, I'm just attacking with red cards. Is really like, they're like, oh, which red cards do you... I finished with Siege Can Committer. I finished with Fire Blast. Oh, that's novel. Both are ways that you could do it, you know? Like, and I feel like we're just like, well, this deck has to have this. Well, that's just because that's the name that you gave.
Well, no, I'm just saying because I played it, and because I played it so much, and I've put it in all the situations. And the biggest thing was
when you wouldn't play Plow. There was a time before Call of the Herd. You only played Call of the Herd in response to losing to Bill repeatedly.
Yeah, I only played Call of the Herd because I was losing to Call of the Herd. But the one thing that has always been good has been Korean Dryad, and not just because you could play it on turn 1, not just because you play it on turn 2, and not just because you can play it on turn 3, but also because you could play it on turn 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, or 10, and beyond. Like, it was actually a card that having at any stage of the game is good. I think 3 copies is very interesting because you don't need to draw 2 Korean Dryads. You only need to draw 1, but if you're worried about Swords of Plowshares, and if you're worried about not countering, like if you'd rather not counter Swords, like, so here's basically my...
It's not really a card you want to pull off the top of your deck when you're empty-handed later in the game.
You're never empty-handed. You're just awesome blue Xerox deck. Like you just like, you have Gush in your deck. Like if you're empty-handed, your opponent's like super dead too. And then if it is your peel empty-handed, I mean, I have a lot to say about this because you have port and you have opt. You can manipulate your deck and navigate such that. But like, I don't really buy that. Oh yeah, I think that the previous structure of Grotog was like Meddling Mage naming Swords of Plowshares, play Korean Dryad, and your opponent can't do anything, right? Because you just counter the next one spell that matters and like whatever. Then the metagame had like a little bit more of like things that can block Meddling Mage or things that can interact favorably with Korean Dryad that aren't named Swords of Plowshares. Although there aren't many, right? Because there's just more removal spells, which like whatever. And then a bunch of stuff that's too expensive to cast into counter spells. But like making Meddling Mage worse made your Meddling Mage naming Swords of Plowshares plan also worse. And then that kind of changed things. So like, I don't really buy that you're like playing Meddling Mage but not Korean Dryad, because it always felt like you're playing Meddling Mage because you're playing Korean Dryad. I do buy, obviously, like, okay, we're playing this other thing. We're playing a blue-white control deck, or like a blue-white base control deck that can have Meddling Mage and can do a lot of these sort of like powerful disruptive things, and is like less interested in like having a Tarmogoyf style threat in the deck to kind of do the attacking thing, you know. Like I'm fine if you're gonna, you know, intuition for 3 Call the Herds and you have a Meddling Mage in play naming like something other than Swords of Plowshares because you have Swords of Plowshares in your deck. Like all that stuff is like a different imagination. But like the Grotog identity has always been Korean Dryad is the most efficient creature in the entire format, except for maybe Tempting Worm, right? And then and like it's entirely built around that. And then the other thing is Grotog is like completely built around Mox Diamond, right? Like Mox Diamond like weirdly makes the deck like do all these like crazy choices. Like I don't even know if you would need to play Armageddon or Winter Orb in the deck if you didn't have Mox Diamond. Like you might just not care. It's like Delver decks in Legacy like sometimes play Winter Orb, but they sometimes don't. Like most of the time they're just like, I have Wasteland, you know. So
yeah. Those
are all kind of dimensions there, but I guess I'd have to say that for another podcast. But I don't know. Maybe you should play your SWB and other LAN H cook.
Maybe I will.
Yeah.
Right now, it feels like it's not quite there. It feels a little 3-drop heavy, and I haven't figured out how to
You
make
are
it
going to send me the list,
smooth.
though. I'm kind of...
And then the cantrips feel worse without the Korean Dryad.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, you should send me the list. I'm kind of offended that you haven't that.
Hey, am I frozen? What's going on?
You dropped out for a second, but we should call it.
But now my audio is weird.
Well,
we should call of the herd.
We should call of the herd. We should fuck it. We call.
Look at this deck.
Okay.
This is an old standard deck, but this is a
Squirrel Opposition Grand Prix Milwaukee 2002. It got second place in the hands of none other than Patrick Chapin, losing to Trenches in the final, piloted by Eric Taylor. Squirrel Opposition.
I had 3 win-ins in this Grand Prix. I lost all 3.
I did notice that Michael J. Flores was not in the top.
I
8
was
of this.
in like 12th.
Other members of the top 8 include William (quotation Baby Huey) (quotation).
Oh, you know who I
Jensen,
lost to the last round? BK.
playing Battle of Wits, and Brian Kibler playing Psychotog. Squirrel Opposition, piloted by Patrick Chapin, consists of 22 lands, 9 forest, 9 island, and 4 Yavimaya coast. That's a mana base. 2 Arrogant Worm, 3 Basking Root Wall, 4 Birds of Paradise. Oh, okay. That's our fixing. 4 Merfolk Looter, 4 Mauled Mongrel, 3 Circular Logic, 4 Counterspell, 4 Factor Fiction, 2 Compulsion, 4 Opposition, 4 Squirrel's Nest, 2 Bear Escape, Call the Herd, Gainsay, Jungle Barrier. Oh my god. Jungle Barrier in the sideboard. Static Orb and Upheaval in the sideboard. In this year, Squirrel Opposition was also a World's Top 8 deck, was it not? I feel like there's a gold border version of this.
I think that was like 1 or 2 years before this. But the reason that I brought this deck up is because, I mean, it's weird because this is a green deck, but Patrick played Compulsion. And honestly, his match against Neil Reeves is the best match I've ever seen someone play from the perspective of mental game. And it's rated on a curve because Neil Reeves is very famous for having one of the best mental games in the history of the Pro Tour, and Patrick radically outplayed him, like unbelievably outplayed him. Just on like he started with nothing and then ended the game with everything. And he explained it to me later, and he's like, this is what Neil was thinking. But the reason I bring it up is this card Compulsion. It's weird because it's a green deck, but is Compulsion the other survival of the fittest? And I was thinking about stuff like, are there interesting things that we want to do with cards like Waterfront Bouncer that you're priced into playing green because it's a creature? But like Compulsion's kind of really great. Kind of. I'm putting kind of here.
Yeah, throw it in your squee deck, right?
It has twice the activation cost of Survival of the Fittest, but it's really versatile and it's very powerful. You know,
I find that the Survival of the Fittest in this situation is a card that's also included in this deck, which is Merfolk Looter. And Merfolk Looter is amazing, and I think decks should play Merfolk Looter, and like they should play other creatures because Merfolk Looter is going to get lava darted or whatever nonsense, and you kind of have to like do other things. But I don't think there's any world in which 2 mana draw a card, 4 mana with 2 mana down payment ever does it. I love Compulsion. I fell in love with Compulsion because one of the first Magic tournaments that I watched an online stream of was the worlds in which Mirari's Wake was being played, and I think I was either up at 4 a.m. to watch it or up until 4 a.m. watching Mirari's Wake mirrors, and I didn't really understand what was going on. And I'm very intrigued by Compulsion, but I think it's just a artifact of its time, only good because you know you had this deep analysis circular logic world, and you just didn't have, I mean, the premier beatdown deck of its time of the golden age of Compulsion was Goblins, right? And you know, your
this
deck
era,
was
the beatdown deck was like red green with specifically Yavimaya Barbarian.
well, as we can see, this is 2002, so it's just earlier than the 2003 standard I'm talking about. But you know,
it was Yavimaya Barbarian because he could run past the Psychotalk.
Yeah, I mean, there's no beatdown decks in this top 8 unless this Trenches deck is a beatdown deck, which is not. This Trenches deck is a Jeskai control deck with 3 Goblin Trenches as its only win con. I mean,
there's Lightning Angel, right?
There is no Lightning Angel in this deck.
But if you think about blue enchantments that make you discard that could slot into the blue-green survival squee deck, what about Attunement?
Yeah, I mean,
Landy hates Attunement.
Well, I'm not revolted by the sound of like Attunement for card advantage. Like I'm just like revolted by the idea that you would transform into this deck that activates Attunement a bunch until it has 0 cards in hand, and then you like cast Orm's Chant and Replenish, and they counter the Orm's Chant, and they counter the Replenish. And now you have 0 cards in hand, and then you lose.
Did I mention Landy hates Attunement?
Like, if you're gonna Attunement and put 4 Basking Root Walls into play, I'm much more on board.
Yeah.
Anyway, this is just
Like
a
if you're like even in, if you're a third place finisher at the smallest Lobstercon of all time, you might discard Squee to your attunement, at which point it would actually become card selection or card advantage. But the way that we're using attunement now is an abomination to the god of card advantage. Okay, like we worship at the altar of value, and attunement is like literally the devil in this scenario.
I like attunement in the Blue Storm deck too.
I can also get behind that because islands, you can't do anything with islands. when you're
Mengu
going
and
off.
Rich both cut a lot of cards that people think are really good, right? Like neither one of them has 4 Seal of Cleansing.
Listen,
Neither one,
listen. I know where you're going with you. I know where you're going with this. I know where you're going with this, and I will simply tell you that yes, I do think that I am better than Mengu and Rich.
Okay,
like you're forcing me to say it, so I'm just gonna say it. like there are people who play 4 copies of attunement in their replenish deck, and then there's people who know that attunement sucks, and I can't like you can choose to be one of those people like Rich Shea, whatever, Andrea Mengucci, whatever, or you can be like none other than Lanny, who's a
EDT's
genius.
deck literally has 4 Meddling Mage, 3 Lightning Angel, 4 Flame Tongue, Kavu Transformational Sideboard.
Oh, I didn't look at the sideboard. Who cares about 15s? I'm just looking at
sideboarding.
This is just Mengu. This is just Mengu replenished. Fourth into 4 angels.
No,
and
it's
4
a
meddling
control
mage.
deck in game 1, and then it becomes a beatdown. I mean, he has 4 Flame Tongue Kavu. He's really serious about this.
We've got to proxy these decks. We got to proxy all 8 of this top 8.
I don't have to proxy this. I can just build this deck. I have enough cards to build EDT.
I need you to build all of them. I need you to build Eric Danger Taylor's and Squirrel Opposition and
I didn't realize he had
Cyclog.
Memory Lapse. Memory Lapse Repulse. We could do better than Syncopate. This deck is sweet. 4 Counterspell, 4 Absorb. I don't know. This seems like it could be competitive to me. Like, obviously not in exactly this form, but like, you take a piece of sandpaper to this could be there. You don't you think? It's got some stuff.
I mean, it's basically like the solution without creatures, right? Like 4 Coastal Tower tying the mana base together. I mean, this deck is never casting Counterspell until turn 7, and if it does, it has to tap Sky Cloud Expanse
you really
to do
have
it.
to gamble. Nobody has Price of Progress if you want it. If you're taking this to the meetup, though.
7 Island, 3 Mountain.
This is like 19 non-basic lands.
We don't have Flooded Strand, so we have the benefit of Flooded Strand.
There's
So
no planes in this deck.
I will tell you what I think. I think that we should be playing Coastal Tower in our decks.
I'm in love with Coastal Tower Skycloud Expanse. I'm into this.
Like, not taking damage from your land is amazing. And if you think about it, Coastal Tower is just a 1-drop. It's just a 1-drop.
Not being able to plow the turn 1 lackey because your white source is a Coastal Tower, not so great.
It's fine. We
But
have
this deck doesn't have plow.
we just need 14 other white sources and we'll be fine.
I had this right next to me. Right next
Michael
to me.
J is holding up premodern unplayable Prophetic Bolt. 5 mana to deal 4 damage and impulse.
Is add an impulse
Yeah, it's
to
Impulse
a card
Fire
that you wouldn't
Blast. It's
play
amazing.
otherwise.
Fire Blast is a card that costs 0 mana. so I would stay away from
Impulse
comparisons.
Ristic Lightning.
Look
Yeah.
at how many of these Eric Danger Taylor cards I have right next to me.
All right. Well, this has been Spy Colony featuring Stephen
featuring,
Wyatt Danger
Meetup
Bush.
Great SWB and player who's better than Andrea Mengucci and Rich Shea. Lanny Wong.
You know, somebody like
Honor to be in your presence.
you were backing me into the corner, and I was just like, I don't think you should play in 2 minute replenish. You can play 1 or 2, maybe you could play 3. 4 is insane to me. But you can keep doing it. You can keep winning tournaments with Replenish. You can keep being the Italian national champion or the most successful, winningest webcam player of all time. And I'm just going to be over here and just be like, well, you know what would be good is if you just cut an attunement or 2 from your deck, replace them with anything else. Sabo's Web even, I don't care. Exalted
What if
Angel.
you syncopated one of their enchantments?
Oh, man,
Is that RFP it?
I'm down with
Yeah,
I'm down
RFP
with-
syncopate.
I'm down with Syncopate.
Rock and roll.
If I
Eric Danger Taylor's deck.
if I
think
syncopate, okay, hear me out. I don't even have to counter replenishes if I syncopate all your opalescence. You just like
New
try
tech.
casting
This deck also
opalescence.
has memory lapse.
I don't think memory lapse is exciting.
See, that's the 4 repulse is like what?
Like this is just a format in which players were casting one spell a turn for like maybe the first 10 turns.
Obviously doesn't have access to Swords to Plowshares.
Like memory lapse is not exciting in a world in which your opponent is capable of casting more than one spell a turn. Like I'm pretty excited to memory lapse a 4-cost card, of which there are just one in one deck being replenished. And if you memory lapse SWB's Abundance, congratulations. He'll just
gonna
cast
cast
it
it
again.
next turn.
Yeah, he's just going to cast it next turn because you're getting Port Wastelanded out of the game to begin with. You know, and don't get me started on memory lapse predict. That's unplayable. All of these things are whatever.
Didn't you have it in a deck you posted in the Discord last week?
I had a memory lapse with predict, but I thought predict was going to be more compelling alongside format staple Mary's Guile. And the resulting conclusion was it is not that good to have
You haven't put those in your Sunscape Familiar deck? Seems fun.
predict memory lapse in my Sunscape
Yeah.
deck. That's interesting. So I will think about that. I think
What
that
if we played Domain with Sunscape Familiar?
so Domain's interesting because I think that you really need to identify what the core 2 colors are. And if it's blue-green, it's really hard to make work. But like blue-green is like the best base for
I was
Domain.
thinking blue-green because like your Harrows will cost 2, your Intuitions will cost 2.
Yeah, I mean,
A lot of counter spells for 1.
so you play blue-green and then you just like play a Polluted Delta and a Windswept Heath to pick up the mountain and whatever. But the other issue is that Harrow is just like a risky card to be playing. But you can cook with this, you know, whenever you decide to get back into the kitchen and get unwashed.
Okay, I've got it. 24 in me.
Oh God. Okay.
Hear me out. It's 23 in me, but we
You have to
added-
stop talking about this because
miscalculation.
people will not stop asking about it. And
I
I
know.
I promise you, if
I
you're
know.
listening,
And you're the one who's active on socials.
if you're listening
So-
to this
24
and you're
in
just
me.
thinking to yourself, I'm very curious about what this deck is. I will tell you that you don't need to be and that you're better off
Let me
not
just ask,
knowing.
Both of you have seen this message. What was Rich Shea's reaction to 23andMe?
As we discussed earlier,
This deck
Rich
looks
at times is often misled about the power level of certain
Wyatt
cards.
is nodding his head. This deck looks awesome. Rich Shea said.
It does. I've been waiting for you to bring it.
I guess the last thing that I will say is I wanted to shout out our coffee supporters. Other places that have monetary support vehicles do this religiously. I have never done it on this podcast, so I'm going to do it right now. Shout out to Tomas Alexandra, Dr. Manabase, Judder Meng, or Chris C. from the local scene, Ryan Marvin, Alex KJ, Island Home of the Duress Crew, Andy Levine, Binary Soloist, Sunny JP, Rich Bork, Graham V, Phil Q, Icorn, and SWB himself for supporting the Premodern podcast. A regular donation or a one-time donation gives you access to the Secret Spy Colony Discord, in which Michael J often drops the worst deck you've ever seen in your life and then won't shut up about it for the following 3 weeks. Instead of, I don't know, building something that does anything ever or just playing that. This has been the Spy Colony podcast. Thank you to all of our supporters, including Steven himself, a rare coveted Spike
Isn't
Soldier
Luis
tier.
also in the Discord, and Phil.
They were one-time or subscriber donators. Again, a one-time donation of $5 gets you Discord access, and then I also added Rich Shea and Charles Engels to the Discord. Shout out to them because in exchange for Bryce as well, Bryce Menard, in exchange for a stack of unglued islands also gets you access to the secret Discord. So
I don't even know who the
Very nice.
people in the Discord are. I just know that I interact with them.
yeah, it's like the only Discord that Mike is allowed to speak in. If you want to hear Mike speak and embarrass himself on a regular basis, you want to hear his unfiltered thoughts that would get him canceled in other places, you can head over to ko-fi.com/spikecolony. And if I see you at Lobstercon, or if I get my shit together, I will work on some stamp cards and promos. I promised Steven a hat last year that said "fuck it, we ball," and I still owe him that. So we'll work on getting hats made, hopefully in the next 2 months. And other nonsense. But yeah, our swag game is lacking, but I will work on improving that. But hey, weekly releases, eh? What do we think? How are we feeling?
SWB, should I play 23andMe or or Pitiless Rack at the next meetup? Or I could just play in the standard event, which if you want to meet me there, I might, and if I'm late or whatever, I'll leave you a deck. Don't worry about it.
23andMe for Manhattan, Pitiless Rack for Brooklyn, and Lanny, yes. Weekly releases are great. You're doing it. Thank you.
Love to hear it. Any shout outs, Mr. Dangerbush?
All the shout outs. We have a great scene here.
Yeah. Can't shout them out enough. So sweet to have Phil Wynn be able to make it out to the recent mega meetup. And if you're listening to this, you are in the New York Discord, but possible weekly events hosted by Hex & Co. Could be an exciting
there's going to
development.
be a league, right?
Well, it needs to spark enough interest. So just have to get something going for that. And Premodern is excellent. Lobstercon is coming up. I have 2 YouTube videos in the queue. Another one where I play Dreadnought, where I have 2 of everything. And just a little testing sesh with some Mystic Enforcer in my Grotog deck. So keep your eyes peeled for that. And love Spike Colony.
I want to shout out Zach Hill. Zach Hill, Pro Tour Top 8 competitor, former member of R&D. And I'd like to shout him out because he noted that, the resurrection renaissance of Stephen Wyatt Bush was the greatest narrative arc in the history of Magic the Gathering.
Zach is my first Magic teammate, if you will. We used to brew decks over email together. Go Zach.
So shout out to Zach Hill.
That's the story for another podcast, I guess. We will certainly have Steven back after he wins 5 more meetups.
He'll only need 4 tries to win 5 more.
Yeah, and then and top 8 and inevitably top 8's Lobstercon with the green deck. Love Spike.
Game over.